Tonight, we embark upon a tranquil journey, drifting back through the currents of time to an age of profound transformation. Our destination lies within the vast expanse of Russian history, a landscape reshaped by the singular vision of one man. We will trace the arc of a life that spanned the late 17th and early 18th centuries, a period of immense change, meticulously observing the forces that moulded a Tsar into an emperor. This narrative is crafted not for haste, but for a gentle unfolding, allowing each detail to settle softly. We invite you to surrender to the quiet rhythm of historical discovery, letting the weight of centuries and the intricate tapestry of a pivotal reign guide you towards repose. There will be no urgency, no sharp turns, only a steady, measured exploration of the past. Consider this an invitation to a calm contemplation, a slow immersion into the world of Peter Alexeyevich, known to history as Peter the Great. We will follow his path from the quiet shadows of his early years, through the tumultuous currents of his regency, to the grand pronouncements of his later reign. Each step of this journey will be presented with a thoughtful deliberation, allowing the narrative to breathe and the intricate details of his era to emerge with clarity and calm. As we delve into the annals, we seek not drama, but understanding. We aim to illuminate the contours of a life lived on a grand scale, yet presented with a soothing, observational lens. Allow the soft cadence of the past to envelop you, as we begin our quiet exploration of a truly remarkable historical figure. Let the story of Peter the Great unfold gently, and guiding your thoughts towards a peaceful stillness as we prepare to journey through his entire existence. Before Peter, there was Russia, a land of immense proportions, stretching across the vast Eurasian plain, a tapestry woven from endless forests, winding rivers, and sprawling steppes. In the late 17th century, this immense realm existed largely within its own rhythms, a world apart from the bustling maritime powers and intellectual ferment of Western Europe. Its borders, though expansive, often felt like a protective shell, preserving ancient traditions and a unique cultural identity. Life moved at a different pace then. News travelled slowly, carried by horseback or river barge, sometimes taking weeks or months to traverse the great distances between Moscow and its outlying territories. Villages remained largely isolated, their daily routines dictated by the seasons and the timeless agricultural calendar. The grand cathedrals and wooden churches, with their onion domes reaching skyward, dotted the landscape, silent sentinels of a deeply religious society. This was a world steeped in tradition, where the old ways held firm. Change, when it came, arrived deliberately, often imperceptibly, like the slow creep of winter across the frozen land. The influences that shaped daily life and governance had largely been homegrown, cultivated over centuries within the specific context of Russian Orthodoxy and a centralized autocratic state. It was into this vast, largely self-contained world that Peter Alexeyevich would be born, a realm of quiet majesty and profound isolation, awaiting a catalyst for transformation. The air itself seemed to carry the echoes of generations, a deep hum of continuity that had defined the Russian spirit for centuries. This tranquil, ancient backdrop, with its slow-turning seasons and its deep-rooted customs, provides the serene stage upon which the extraordinary life we are about to explore would begin. It was a nation poised, though unknowingly, on the cusp of an awakening, a profound shift from its deep slumber. Within the ancient walls of the Terem Palace in the Moscow Kremlin, on June 9th, 1672, a new life entered the world. This was the birth of Peter Alexeyevich, son of Tsar Alexis I and his second wife, Natalia Kirillovna Narishkina. The event was, as with all imperial births, an occasion of quiet ceremony, and profound expectation within the court. Tsar Alexis, a ruler known for his gentle demeanour and deep piety, who has already had numerous children from his first marriage to Maria Miloslavskaya. However, the arrival of another male heir from his new, younger wife carried its own particular weight and promise for the future of the Romanov dynasty. Natalia Narishkina, a woman of progressive inclinations for her time, brought a breath of fresh air to the conservative court, and her influence, though subtle at first, would eventually touch the upbringing of her son. The infant Peter was, at the moment of his birth, simply another member of the sprawling imperial family, though his position as a son of the reigning Tsar placed him firmly within the succession. His early days would have been spent within the sheltered confines of the palace, surrounded by nurses and tutors, shielded from the complexities of the outside world. The elaborate rituals and strict protocols of the Muscovite court would have formed the quiet backdrop to his earliest years. No grand pronouncements of his future greatness would have accompanied his first cries. He was simply a child, a prince, born into a lineage that stretched back through centuries of Russian history. His arrival was a continuation of the imperial line, a new thread woven into the rich tapestry of the Romanovs. The significance of this particular birth would only unfold with the passage of time, as the boy grew and began to reveal the extraordinary force of nature that lay within him. For now, there was only the quiet presence of a newborn in the heart of the Kremlin, a gentle beginning for a life that would eventually reshape an empire. The Romanov dynasty, into which Peter Alexievich was born, had established its hold on the Russian throne relatively recently in 1613. Their rise followed the turbulent period known as the Time of Troubles, a chaotic era of famine, civil war, and foreign intervention that nearly brought Russia to its knees. Mikhail Romanov, Peter's great-grandfather, was elected Tsar by a National Assembly, bringing a much-needed sense of order and stability to a fractured realm. By the late 17th century, when Peter arrived, the Romanovs had solidified their power considerably. 3 generations of rulers, Mikhail, Alexis, and Fyodor III, had worked to centralize authority, restore the prestige of the Tsardom, and expand Russia's vast territories. The dynasty had become deeply intertwined with the Russian Orthodox Church, which lent immense spiritual authority to their rule, portraying the Tsar as God's chosen representative on earth. This divine sanction reinforced the traditional, almost sacred nature of their governance. The expectation for any royal child born into this lineage was clear and unchanging: to uphold tradition, to embrace the Orthodox faith, and to eventually contribute to the stability and glory of the Russian state. Dynastic continuity was paramount. Each birth, particularly of a male heir, was a quiet reaffirmation of the established order, a testament to the enduring strength of the Romanovs. Children of the Tsar were raised within a rigid framework of religious instruction, historical awareness, and courtly etiquette. Their education, while comprehensive within the Russian context, often remained insulated from the intellectual currents shaping Western Europe. This emphasis on tradition extended to all aspects of court life and governance. Change was viewed with suspicion, and the old ways were revered. The Romanovs, prior to Peter, had largely governed a self-contained empire, its identity deeply rooted in its unique history and spiritual foundations. The stability they had brought after the time of troubles was cherished, and the maintenance of this equilibrium was a silent, unspoken duty passed down through generations. Peter, as a young prince, would thus inherit a throne deeply embedded in these ancient customs and expectations, a world far removed from the transformations he would later seek to enact. His very existence was, at this early stage, a quiet affirmation of the Romanov legacy, not yet a challenge to it. Within the ancient red brick walls of the Moscow Kremlin, Peter Alexeyevich spent his earliest years in a manner befitting a young prince, yet also with a certain freedom that would later define him. His childhood unfolded primarily in the women's quarters, the Terem, a secluded and richly decorated part of the palace where the Tsaritsa and her children resided. This was a world of soft fabrics, intricate icons, and the gentle rhythms of court life, largely shielded from the political machinations of the wider court. His mother, Tsaritsa Natalia Narishkina, played a significant role in these formative years. She was a woman of a more open and less conservative disposition than many within the traditional Russian court. Having been raised in a more westernized household before her marriage to Tsar Alexis, she possessed a broader outlook, though still firmly rooted in Russian culture. It is said that her influence instilled in Peter a sense of curiosity and less rigid adherence to the strictest Muscovite customs than might have otherwise been expected. She encouraged his early learning and permitted a degree of exploration that was somewhat unusual for a royal child of the era. Unlike many of his half-siblings, who were often frail or sickly, Peter was a robust and energetic child. From a very young age he exhibited a restless spirit and an insatiable curiosity that extended beyond the confines of his immediate surroundings. While other royal children might have been content with traditional tutors and religious instruction, Peter showed an early fascination with practical matters and the world beyond the palace windows. He was observed to be unusually observant, or often captivated by the activities of the palace guards or the craftsmen working within the Kremlin grounds. His earliest education followed the conventional path, focusing on literacy, arithmetic, and most importantly, the tenets of the Orthodox faith. Yet, even within these structured lessons, Peter's mind seemed to drift towards more tangible interests. He absorbed information not just from books, but from direct observation and hands-on engagement. This nascent desire to understand how things worked, to grasp their practical application, was a subtle but consistent thread running through his early childhood. It was a glimpse of the energetic, inquisitive mind that would later push Russia towards profound transformation, even amidst the sheltered innocence of his Kremlin days. The quiet equilibrium of Peter's early childhood was abruptly altered by a profound event, the passing of his father, Tsar Alexis I. In January of 1676, when Peter was just 3 years old, the Tsar, who had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, succumbed to illness. His death was a significant moment, not merely for the grieving family, but for the entire Russian state, immediately plunging the question of succession into an intricate and uncertain phase. Tsar Alexis had been a diligent ruler, known for his piety and his efforts to modernize aspects of Russian administration, albeit cautiously. His death, however, left behind a complex family situation that was ripe for political maneuvering. He had 2 distinct sets of heirs, stemming from his 2 marriages. From his first marriage to Maria Miloslavskaya, he had several surviving children, including the sickly Fyodor, the intellectually sharp but physically challenged Ivan, and a number of daughters, most notably the ambitious Sophia. From his second marriage to Natalia Narishkina, Peter's mother, there was only Peter himself and his elder sister Natalia. According to tradition, the eldest surviving son was the rightful heir. This would have been Fyodor. However, Fyodor was a young man of delicate health, often confined by his ailments, and his capacity to rule was a constant source of concern among the boyars, the powerful Russian nobility. The prospect of a weak or short-lived Tsar always carried the risk of renewed instability, recalling the turbulent time of troubles that had preceded the Romanov dynasty. The immediate aftermath of Alexis's death thus introduced a palpable sense of apprehension within the Kremlin. The stability that the Romanovs had carefully cultivated since 1613 now appeared vulnerable. The court factions, representing the interests of the Miloslavsky family, Fyodor and Ivan's maternal relatives, and the Narishkin family, Peter's maternal relatives, began to subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, jockey for influence. Though still a small child, Peter was now, by virtue of his birth, a pawn in a burgeoning power struggle. His existence, and his mother's position, became central to the unfolding drama of imperial succession. The quiet life he had known was irrevocably altered, replaced by the undercurrents of court politics. Following the death of Tsar Alexis, the imperial crown passed to his eldest surviving son, Fyodor III. His reign, which commenced in 1676, spanned a period of 6 years, concluding in 1682. For Peter, still a young child, these years represented a relatively calm interlude, a quiet period before the more dramatic events that would define his adolescence. Fyodor III was, by all accounts, a man of considerable intellect and a gentle disposition. He possessed a keen interest in education and the arts, and during his brief rule he initiated several reforms, particularly in the military and in the realm of court ceremonial. He abolished the antiquated system of mesnichestvo, a complex hierarchy based on family prestige that often hampered military appointments and civil service, seeking to introduce a more meritocratic approach. He also established the Slavic Greek-Latin Academy, an institution that would play a significant role in the intellectual life of Russia. Despite these earnest efforts and his progressive inclinations, Fyodor's reign was continually overshadowed by his profound physical frailty. From early childhood, he had suffered from a debilitating illness, possibly scurvy or a form of rickets, which left him with a frail constitution and a limited lifespan. His weak health was a constant source of concern, not only for his immediate family, but for the entire court. The question of his longevity, and by extension, the stability of the succession, was never far from the minds of those in power. This underlying fragility meant that Fyodor's time on the throne, while marked by a degree of quiet reform, was never truly secure in its continuity. It felt in many ways like a provisional arrangement. The court factions, though momentarily quiescent, remained keenly aware of the precarious health of the Tsar. They understood that another succession crisis was not a distant possibility, but a looming certainty. For young Peter, these years passed with relative tranquillity, allowing him to continue his informal education and pursue his curiosities away from the immediate glare of imperial responsibility. Yet the quiet, ticking clock of Fyodor's health meant that this calm was destined to be fleeting, merely a pause before the intricate and often brutal machinations of Russian dynastic politics would once again erupt. The fragile peace that had characterized Fyodor III's reign shattered abruptly with his death in April of 1682. This event ignited the long-simmering tensions within the court, near plunging Russia into a brutal struggle for power. The young Peter, barely 10 years old, was thrust directly into the heart of this storm, becoming a terrified witness to a violent uprising that would leave an indelible mark upon his developing psyche. The primary actors in this unfolding drama were the Streltsy, the Moscow garrison of musketeers. These regiments, originally formed as an elite guard, had by this period become a volatile and politically charged force. They were often ill-paid, discontented, and susceptible to manipulation by powerful boyar factions. In the spring of 1682, fueled by rumours, grievances, and the machinations of Princess Sophia Alexeyevna, Peter's older half-sister, the Streltsy, rose in rebellion. The uprising was not a distant event for Peter. It unfolded directly within the confines of the Kremlin, the very walls that had housed his childhood. From the windows of the palace he would have seen the armed Streltsy, their distinctive uniforms and long muskets swarming through the palace squares. He would have heard the shouts, the cries, and the terrifying sounds of violent confrontation. This was not a controlled military exercise, but a chaotic and bloody purge. Members of the Narishkin family, Peter's maternal relatives who had risen to prominence during the brief period of his initial proclamation as Tsar, were singled out for particularly brutal treatment. Peter witnessed the murder of close family friends and relatives, some dragged from the palace and dismembered by the enraged musketeers. The raw, visceral horror of these events, the sight of severed limbs, the bloodied cobblestones of the Kremlin, and the palpable fear that gripped everyone around him would have been an overwhelming sensory assault on a child. This experience, far from being a mere historical anecdote, was a profound psychological trauma. It instilled in Peter a deep-seated distrust of the old Moscow nobility and a lasting aversion to the uncontrolled power of the Streltsy. The memory of those days, the feeling of utter helplessness in the face of such savagery, would fuel his later determination to create a disciplined, loyal and modernized military force, one that would never again hold the power to terrorize the Tsar and his court. The chaotic violence of 1682 became a foundational element in his understanding of power, stability, and the urgent need for radical change in the Russian state. In the wake of the terrifying Streltsy uprising, a new political order began to solidify, with Peter's ambitious half-sister, Sophia Alexeyevna, at its very centre. Having skillfully manipulated the volatile musketeers and leveraged the chaos to her advantage, Sophia emerged as the dominant force in Russian politics. The traditional patriarchal structures of the Russian court, which typically excluded women from direct political power, were, for a time, set aside by her sheer will and strategic acumen. The immediate challenge for Sophia was to legitimize her position and stabilize the succession. The solution she engineered was unprecedented: a dual tsardom. Peter, still a boy, and his frail older half-brother Ivan V were proclaimed co-tsars. However, due to Ivan's chronic ill health and Peter's youth, neither was truly fit to rule. Now, this created a vacuum that Sophia was perfectly positioned to fill. On May 29, 1682, by decree of the Zemsky Sobor, or Assembly of the Land, Sophia Alexeyevna was formally declared regent. This ascendancy marked a significant departure from established norms. Sophia was a woman of formidable intellect and considerable education, rare for a woman of her era in Russia. She possessed a keen understanding of statecraft, a sharp mind for intrigue, and an unyielding determination to wield power. Her intelligence was matched only by her ambition, a trait that had been carefully nurtured during her years within the confines of the Kremlin's women's quarters, where she had keenly observed the workings of power. As regent, Sophia effectively governed Russia. She presided over the Boyar Duma, received foreign ambassadors, and issued decrees in the names of the two young tsars. Her authority was symbolized by a unique throne, crafted with two seats for Ivan and Peter, but with a hidden third space behind them, where Sophia herself would sit, listening and often dictating responses to the boyars. This physical arrangement perfectly encapsulated the reality of her regency. She was the true power behind the throne, guiding the hands and voices of her young co-tsars. Her rise to power was a testament to her political skill and resilience in a deeply conservative society. She had navigated the treacherous currents of court politics, utilized the latent discontent of the Streltsy, and positioned herself as the indispensable figure capable of bringing order to the fractured state. For Peter, Sophia's regency meant a period of relative political marginalization, but also a quiet observation of an intelligent woman's exercise of power, a dynamic that would later shape his own understanding of authority and governance. With Sophia firmly entrenched as regent, the young Peter found himself largely removed from the direct machinations of the Kremlin court. This was not a formal banishment, but rather a strategic distancing by Sophia, who preferred to have the potential rival out of immediate sight. Thus Peter, along with his mother, Natalia Narishkina, retreated to the village of Preobrazhenskoye, a royal estate situated a few miles outside the ancient walls of Moscow. This relocation, seemingly a quiet retreat, would prove to be a profoundly formative period in Peter's life, shaping his character and his future reign in ways that the rigid confines of the Kremlin never could. Preobrazhenskoye offered Peter an unparalleled freedom, a stark contrast to the stifling etiquette and rigid traditions of the Russian court. Here, away from the watchful eyes of conservative boyars and the intricate web of courtly intrigue, Peter was at liberty to pursue his burgeoning interests without constraint. His days were not filled with tedious religious rituals or formal studies, but rather with hands-on exploration and practical learning. It was in Preobrazhenskoye that Peter's innate curiosity truly blossomed. He spent countless hours in the German Quarter, a foreign settlement nearby, observing the lives and trades of its European inhabitants. He became fascinated by their crafts, their military techniques, and their scientific instruments. This exposure to Western ideas and technologies, largely inaccessible within the traditional Russian milieu, ignited a spark within him. He gathered around him a motley assortment of companions, including foreign officers, craftsmen, and even ordinary villagers. Together, they engaged in mock battles, military drills, and engineering projects. Peter, with his towering stature and boundless energy, was always at the forefront, not as a distant czar, but as an enthusiastic participant. He learned to drill soldiers, to fire cannons, and to design fortifications. He immersed himself in carpentry, blacksmithing, and even shipbuilding, acquiring practical skills with an earnestness that bewildered many traditional courtiers. This period of semi-exile to Preobrazhenskoye was, in essence, an unconventional education, far removed from the formal schooling expected of a czar. It fostered in Peter a deep appreciation for practical knowledge, a distrust of idle ceremony, and a profound understanding of the world beyond Russia's isolated borders. These formative years, spent in the relative freedom of Preobrazhenskoye, laid the foundation for the revolutionary changes he would later bring to his vast empire. In the unfettered environment of Preobrazhenskoye, Peter's passion for military affairs found its most direct and significant expression, the formation of his play regiments. These were no mere childhood games, but rather meticulously organized military units, populated initially by young nobles, court servants, and later commoners and foreigners who shared Peter's fervent interest. These regiments, known as the Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky, began as a youthful diversion but quickly evolved into something far more substantial, laying the foundational stones for a completely new kind of Russian army. Peter himself immersed his entire being into these formations. He did not merely command from a distance. He enlisted as a common drummer, then rose through the ranks, experiencing every aspect of military life firsthand. This hands-on approach allowed him to understand the daily routines, the challenges, and the camaraderie of the soldiers, fostering a profound empathy and practical understanding that would define his leadership. The training within these regiments was rigorous and progressive, far removed from the static ceremonial drills of the traditional streltsy. Peter sought out foreign officers, particularly those with experience in Western European armies, to instruct his burgeoning force. They taught modern infantry tactics, the effective use of muskets and artillery, and the discipline of coordinated maneuvers. Real gunpowder was used, real cannons were fired, and mock battles were waged with a seriousness that often resulted in minor injuries, and occasionally even fatalities. These were not harmless simulations, they were intense, immersive preparations for actual warfare. The composition of these regiments was equally revolutionary. Peter deliberately recruited individuals from all social strata, valuing merit and skill over noble birth. This was a radical departure from the aristocratic military traditions of old Russia, where command often depended more on lineage than on competence. In Peter's play regiments, a commoner could rise through the ranks based on ability, a concept that would profoundly reshape the Russian military and indeed Russian society. These early military endeavours, born of youthful zeal and nurtured in the relative freedom of Preobrazhenskoye, instilled in Peter a deep understanding of modern warfare and a clear vision for a professional, disciplined army. They fostered loyalty among his diverse recruits and solidified his own command experience. The Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky regiments, initially dismissed as the Tsar's childish games, would ultimately become the elite guard units of the new Russian Empire, proving indispensable in Peter's future campaigns and serving as the direct blueprint for his sweeping military reforms. They were the living seeds of a modern army, carefully cultivated by the young Tsar long before he formally ascended to full power. Adjacent to Peter's domain in Preobrazhenskoye lay the Nemetskaya Sloboda, or German Quarter. This unique settlement, a designated area for foreign residents in Moscow, served as a vibrant and accessible window to the Western world, starkly contrasting with the insular traditions of old Russia. For the young Peter, it became an irresistible magnet, drawing him away from the stifling atmosphere of the Kremlin and into a realm of innovation and unfamiliar customs. The German Quarter was a microcosm of European life, populated by merchants, soldiers of fortune, artisans and engineers, primarily from German and Dutch lands. Here one could find houses built in a Western style, taverns serving foreign beverages, and workshops buzzing with the sounds of new technologies. It was a place where European languages were spoken freely, and where people dressed and behaved differently from the traditional Muscovites. Peter's visits to the Sloboda were frequent and prolonged. He was not content merely to observe. His inquisitive nature compelled him to immerse himself fully in this foreign environment. He sought out individuals who possessed practical skills and knowledge. Among them were Dutch shipbuilders and navigators, German engineers, and various craftsmen who could demonstrate the latest European techniques. He spent countless hours in their company, eagerly learning about everything from carpentry and clockmaking to the principles of fortification and navigation. Figures such as Franz Lefort, a Genevan adventurer and military officer, and Carsten Brandt, a Danish shipwright, became important mentors and companions. They introduced Peter to Western military drill, naval architecture, and the broader intellectual currents of Europe. Through these interactions, Peter began to grasp the vast technological and scientific gap that separated Russia from the more advanced nations of the West. He witnessed firsthand the practical applications of scientific principles and the efficiency of modern European methods. The influence of the German Quarter extended beyond practical skills. It exposed Peter to different social norms and a more secular outlook. He observed a society less bound by rigid religious dogma and more open to individual initiative. This exposure gradually began to chip away at his inherited Muscovite conservatism, fostering a growing conviction that Russia needed to shed its ancient ways and embrace European progress. The Nemetskaya Sloboda was not just a place of learning for Peter. It was a crucible where his vision for a transformed Russia began to take tangible shape, fueled by the direct engagement with Western thought and craftsmanship. Within the lively confines of the German Quarter, Peter's innate curiosity found fertile ground, nurtured by an array of experienced foreign mentors. These individuals, often men of humble origins but vast practical knowledge, offered a stark contrast to the scholarly but often detached tutors of the Kremlin. They shaped his understanding of the world not through abstract theories, but through direct observation and hands-on engagement. Two figures stand out prominently among these early influences. Franz Lefort and Patrick Gordon. Franz Lefort, a Genevan of Huguenot descent, was a charismatic and worldly adventurer. Having served in various European armies, he brought a broad perspective on military organisation, diplomacy and courtly life. Lefort quickly became a close confidant and companion to Peter, introducing him to the social customs of the West, including its entertainments and convivial gatherings. More significantly, Lefort fueled Peter's nascent interest in naval matters, sharing stories of seafaring and the power of maritime nations. His influence was less about specific technical instruction and more about broadening Peter's horizons and fostering a taste for European culture and ambition. Patrick Gordon, a Scottish Catholic mercenary, offered a different, yet equally vital form of mentorship. A seasoned military officer, Gordon had a long and distinguished career in Russian service. Possessing a deep understanding of European military tactics, engineering and discipline, he instructed Peter in the intricacies of siege warfare, artillery and modern infantry drills. Gordon's meticulous diary entries provide invaluable insights into Peter's early military education, detailing his enthusiasm for practical exercises and his readiness to learn from anyone, regardless of their station. Under Gordon's tutelage, Peter honed his skills in military strategy and organisation, developing a profound appreciation for discipline and efficiency that would define his future reforms. These mentors did more than impart skills. They instilled in Peter a respect for merit over birth, a belief in the power of practical knowledge, and an understanding of Russia's relative backwardness compared to Western Europe. Through their guidance, Peter's worldview expanded beyond the confines of Muscovite tradition, laying the intellectual groundwork for his ambitious plans for Russia's transformation. They demonstrated that expertise could come from unexpected places, and that true authority often rested on demonstrable competence rather than inherited status. Beyond the theoretical instruction offered by his mentors, Peter possessed an innate driving need to understand how things worked, not merely in concept, but through direct physical engagement. A learning to measure, cut and join wood. This was not a passing fancy. He sought to master the craft, understanding the properties of different timbers and the precision required for strong construction. This intimate familiarity with wood would later prove invaluable in his grand shipbuilding ambitions. His fascination soon extended to the intricate world of shipbuilding. Having discovered an old English boat in a barn near his estate, Peter's imagination was ignited. He sought out Dutch shipwrights, eager to learn every aspect of naval architecture, from keel laying to rigging. He wasn't content to simply issue orders. He would don workman's clothes, pick up an adze, and labour alongside his shipbuilders, his hands often calloused and stained. He learned the complex geometry of a hull, the mechanics of sails, and the art of navigating treacherous waters. This hands-on experience provided him with an unparalleled understanding of naval construction, a knowledge that would underpin the creation of the Russian fleet. Navigation, too, became a serious pursuit. Under the guidance of Dutch masters, Peter delved into the science of charts, compasses, and astronomical observation. He learned to steer a vessel, to read the weather, and to calculate positions at sea. These were not the leisurely diversions of a noble, but the intense studies of an apprentice determined to master his trade. This insatiable curiosity and relentless pursuit of practical skills stood in stark contrast to the traditional education of Russian aristocracy, which often emphasized religious texts, courtly etiquette, and abstract philosophy. Peter found little appeal in such pursuits, preferring the workshop to the throne room, the forge to the formal banquet. He was drawn to the tangible, the functional, and the innovative, believing that true understanding came from doing, from the direct interaction with materials and machines. This profound commitment to practical learning would become a defining characteristic of his reign, shaping his policies and his vision for a modernized Russia. As Peter the Great matured, his experiences in the German Quarter and his pursuit of practical skills provided a stark contrast to the prevailing state of his vast homeland. Late 17th century Russia was, in many respects, a sleeping giant, immense in its geographical reach but largely isolated from the transformative currents sweeping through Western Europe. Its sprawling territories encompassed diverse peoples and landscapes, yet its societal structure remained largely medieval. The economy was overwhelmingly agrarian. The vast majority of the population were peasants, many of them serfs, tied to the land and to their masters. Agricultural methods were traditional, yielding subsistence-level production rather than surplus for widespread trade or industrial development. Towns and cities existed, but they were relatively few and far between, serving primarily as administrative or religious centres rather than hubs of commerce or innovation. Technologically, Russia lagged significantly behind its Western neighbours. While countries like England, France, and the Netherlands were experiencing early industrialisation, scientific revolutions, and colonial expansion, Russia remained largely untouched by these advancements. Its military, though formidable in size, often relied on traditional tactics and equipment that were becoming increasingly outdated. There was little in the way of advanced manufacturing, modern metallurgy, or sophisticated navigation techniques within the native Russian sphere. This technological and economic backwardness was compounded by a profound cultural and intellectual isolation. For centuries, Russia had developed along its own distinct path, largely separated from the intellectual ferment of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment that had reshaped Western thought. Trade routes were limited, diplomatic contacts often sporadic, and the exchange of ideas with the West was minimal. A cornerstone of Russian identity and societal cohesion was the powerful influence of the Orthodox Church. The Church permeated every aspect of life, from daily rituals to political legitimacy. Its teaching shaped moral codes, artistic expression, and historical narratives. While providing a deep spiritual foundation, the Church also tended to reinforce traditionalism and a certain insularity, often viewing Western innovations and secular ideas with suspicion. This deep-seated religious conservatism, combined with geographical remoteness, contributed to a Russia that, on the cusp of the 18th century, appeared to be profoundly traditional, inward-looking, and poised for a dramatic awakening. While Russia remained largely tethered to its ancient traditions, the continent to its west was a crucible of profound transformation. Western Europe in the late 17th century was a dynamic, restless place, a stark contrast to the vast, quiet expanse of Muscovy. This was a world alive with burgeoning ideas, technological innovation, and an escalating competition for power and resources. Intellectually, the stirrings of the Enlightenment were becoming increasingly pronounced. Thinkers across France, England, and the Netherlands were beginning to question established authorities, advocating for reason, individual liberty, and empirical observation. Scientific academies were forming, fostering a spirit of inquiry that led to breakthroughs in astronomy, physics, and medicine. Isaac Newton's work on gravity, for instance, had just profoundly reshaped humanity's understanding of the cosmos, emblematic of a new era of scientific exploration. Politically, the map of Europe was a complex tapestry of emerging nation-states, powerful monarchies, and shifting alliances. Naval power was becoming a decisive factor in global influence, with nations like England, the Dutch Republic, and France investing heavily in building formidable fleets. These navies were not merely instruments of war. They were vital for protecting extensive merchant shipping lanes and projecting power across vast oceans. Control of the seas meant control of trade, and trade meant wealth. Indeed, bustling trade networks crisscrossed the continent and extended far beyond its shores. Ports like Amsterdam, London, and Lisbon were vibrant hubs where goods from Asia, Africa, and the Americas flowed in, fueling burgeoning economies and enriching merchant classes. This expansive commerce fostered a cosmopolitan outlook in many Western European cities, bringing together diverse peoples and ideas. Technological advancements, though not yet fully industrial, were steadily progressing. Improvements in metallurgy, clockmaking, and textile production were laying the groundwork for future revolutions. Military tactics were evolving, demanding more disciplined professional armies and advanced siege warfare techniques. Navigation, cartography, and shipbuilding were becoming increasingly sophisticated, driven by the demands of exploration, trade, and naval supremacy. This was a continent in constant motion, a vibrant arena of innovation, conflict, and intellectual ferment. Its dynamism presented both a challenge and an opportunity for a figure like Peter, who would one day look to these shores not merely with curiosity, but with an urgent desire to reshape his own nation in their image. The year 1689 brought to a head the simmering tension between the young Peter and his ambitious half-sister Sophia. For 7 years, Sophia had skillfully navigated the complexities of Russian politics as regent, her power largely resting on the loyalty of the Streltsy regiments. Yet, as Peter matured, his unconventional education and growing confidence made her continued dominance increasingly untenable. The dual throne arrangement, with the ailing Ivan V alongside Peter, was a temporary solution, and the time for a decisive shift was drawing near. Sophia, perhaps sensing her diminishing grip, made a final desperate move. She attempted to rally the Streltsy to her cause once more, hoping to consolidate her power definitively. However, the political landscape had subtly shifted. Peter, now 17, had cultivated a loyal following among his play regiments and found support among key boyars and foreign officers who saw in him the potential for a new energetic leadership. The critical moment arrived when Sophia sought to have herself proclaimed empress, openly challenging Peter's legitimate claim. Peter, in a move that demonstrated his burgeoning political acumen, did not confront her directly in the Kremlin. Instead, he withdrew to the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius, a fortified monastery, and issued a summons for all loyal military commanders and boyars to join him there. This strategic retreat served to draw a clear line in the sand, forcing allegiance to one side or the other. The response was overwhelming. The majority of the Streltsy regiments, perhaps weary of Sophia's manipulations or recognizing the shifting tides of power, abandoned her and marched to Peter's side. Her most ardent supporters were swiftly arrested. Sophia herself was confined to the Novodevichi convent, a place of monastic seclusion, effectively ending her political career and her regency. Her loyalist minister, Fyodor Shaklovity, was executed, a chilling demonstration of Peter's resolve. This swift and firm suppression of Sophia's challenge marked a profound turning point. It was not merely the end of a regency, it was the definitive assertion of Peter's sole authority. The Streltsy, once the instruments of Sophia's power and the instigators of Peter's childhood trauma, were now firmly under his control, or neutralized. The dual tsardom was effectively over. In man, the path was cleared for Peter to begin shaping Russia according to his own burgeoning vision. The young Tsar, no longer a plaything of circumstance, had taken firm command of his destiny. With Sophia confined and her supporters dispersed, the political landscape of Russia settled into a new, if still somewhat transitional phase. Though his half-brother Ivan V technically remained co-Tsar until his passing a few years later, the real power, the true authority, now resided unequivocally with Peter. He was in all practical terms the sole ruler, and his initial steps reflected a deliberate, if sometimes impulsive, assertion of this newfound control. Peter did not immediately embark on radical reforms. Instead, his early actions were characterized by a pragmatic focus on securing his position and understanding the machinery of state. He began by rewarding those who had stood by him during the confrontation with Sophia, elevating loyal boyars and military commanders to positions of influence. This was a traditional move, solidifying his base of support within the existing power structures. Yet, even in these initial years, a subtle departure from convention could be observed. Peter continued to spend considerable time outside the formal confines of the Kremlin, preferring the more practical, less ceremonial environment of Preobrazhenskoye and the German Quarter. Here, surrounded by his trusted companions and foreign experts, he continued to hone his military skills and absorb Western knowledge. His play regiments, now evolving into the elite Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky Guards, were not merely a hobby, they were a personal army, loyal to him alone, and a potent symbol of his independent authority. He also began to quietly assess the existing administrative apparatus. While he did not yet dismantle it, his keen observational eye would have noted the inefficiencies and corruption inherent in many of the old Muscovite departments. He demonstrated a preference for direct, hands-on engagement, often bypassing traditional intermediaries to address issues himself, a characteristic that would define his later reign. His personal life, too, reflected this assertion of independence. His marriage to Eudoxia Lopukina, arranged by his mother, continued, though it was clear that his interests lay far beyond the domestic sphere. His focus remained on his military exercises, his shipbuilding experiments, and his expanding circle of foreign acquaintances. In essence, Peter's initial period of sole rule was a time of quiet consolidation. He was not yet the transformative figure he would become, but the groundwork was being laid. He was observing, learning, and subtly shifting the levers of power, preparing himself for the grander designs that would soon capture his imagination. The young Tsar was taking firm hold, not just of the throne, but of the very reins of Russia's future. With his internal position secured, Peter's gaze turned outward, drawn by a profound and burgeoning ambition: access to the sea. For centuries Russia had been a landlocked giant, its vast interior disconnected from the vital maritime trade routes and strategic horizons that defined the powerful nations of Western Europe. This isolation was a source of frustration, and Peter, with his first-hand exposure to foreign ships and naval technology, understood its debilitating implications. His initial focus settled on the south, towards the Black Sea, then largely controlled by the formidable Ottoman Empire. The objective became the fortress of Azov, a strategic Ottoman stronghold situated at the mouth of the Don River, guarding the passage to the Sea of Azov and, by extension, the Black Sea. Peter initiated his first major military campaign in 1695, leading a substantial Russian army towards Azov. This endeavour, however, quickly revealed the deep-seated deficiencies within the traditional Russian military. Despite a long and arduous siege, the fortress proved impregnable. The Russians lacked effective siege artillery and, crucially, a naval component to blockade the port and prevent the resupply of the Ottoman garrison from the sea. The campaign ended in a frustrating and costly failure. This initial setback, rather than deterring Peter, served as a powerful lesson. He meticulously analysed the reasons for the defeat, recognising that a modern navy was not merely an ancillary force, but an absolute necessity for successful maritime warfare, and indeed for Russia's future as a significant power. Undaunted, and with characteristic vigour, Peter immediately ordered the construction of a fleet. Shipyards were hastily established in Voronezh, and skilled foreign shipwrights were brought in to supervise the construction of galleys and other vessels. By the spring of 1696, Peter launched his second Azov campaign, this time with a newly constructed, albeit rudimentary, fleet. This naval force, though small, proved decisive. It successfully blockaded Azov from the sea, cutting off Ottoman reinforcements and supplies. On land, the Russian army, now better equipped and commanded, renewed its assault. The combined pressure from both land and sea eventually forced the Ottoman garrison to surrender. The capture of Azov was a momentous victory, providing Russia with its first true access to a warm water sea. It was a tangible step towards breaking Russia's isolation and a powerful affirmation of Peter's vision. More importantly, it underscored irrevocably the critical importance of a modern navy in his strategic thinking, setting the stage for even grander maritime ambitions. The triumph at Azov, while significant, was not viewed by Peter as a definitive end, but rather as a profound and illuminating beginning. The campaigns had laid bare the stark inadequacies of the existing Russian military structure. The traditional army, with its reliance on the noble levy and the Streltsy regiments, proved cumbersome, poorly trained by Western standards, and technologically backward. Artillery was insufficient, engineering skills rudimentary, and tactical coordination often lacking. Peter, with his keen practical eye, observed these deficiencies with an unwavering clarity. The most glaring lesson, however, was the absolute necessity of a modern professional navy. The initial failure to take Azov in 1695 was directly attributable to the absence of a naval blockade. The subsequent success in 1696 was undeniably secured by the hastily built fleet, which prevented the Ottoman resupply of the fortress. And this experience cemented Peter's conviction that Russia could not assert itself on the international stage, nor secure its borders and trade routes without a powerful seaborne arm. The concept of a landlocked empire was, to Peter's progressive mind, a relic of an outdated era. Beyond the immediate military requirements, the Azov campaigns highlighted broader systemic issues. The logistical challenges of supplying a large army in the south, the difficulties in coordinating diverse military units, and the general lack of skilled personnel in areas like navigation, shipbuilding, and advanced weaponry, all pointed to a deeper need for comprehensive reform. Peter recognized that a modern military could not exist in isolation. It required a modern state to support it, a state with efficient administration, a robust industrial base, and a population educated in relevant skills. The lessons from Azov were not merely tactical, they were strategic and foundational. They solidified Peter's understanding that Russia's future prosperity and security depended on a radical transformation of its military, moving away from archaic practices towards the highly organized, disciplined, and technologically advanced models he had observed in Western Europe. This realization ignited a fervent drive within him, a determination to bridge the vast gap between Russia's current capabilities and the standards of the leading European powers. The campaigns served as a crucible, forging his resolve and setting the course for the monumental reforms that would soon follow. With the lessons of Azov firmly impressed upon him, Peter's vision for Russia began to sharpen. The quiet contemplation following the campaigns led to a bold and unprecedented decision, a journey to the heart of Western Europe. In 1697, a vast Russian delegation, numbering nearly 250 individuals, departed Moscow. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. It was the Grand Embassy, a meticulously planned undertaking with multiple ambitious goals, and at its core, Peter himself travelling incognito. The primary objective of this remarkable expedition was learning. Peter harboured an insatiable curiosity and a profound desire to understand the mechanics of Western progress firsthand. He sought knowledge in every practical domain, shipbuilding, navigation, military engineering, artillery manufacturing, and the administrative structures that supported such advancements. He intended to observe, to participate, and to absorb as much practical expertise as possible, believing that only through direct engagement could Russia truly modernize. Beyond the pursuit of knowledge, the Grand Embassy also aimed to forge alliances. Russia remained largely isolated on the European stage, and Peter understood the strategic value of strong diplomatic ties. He hoped to strengthen the existing Holy League against the Ottoman Empire, securing further support for Russia's southern ambitions. However, as the journey unfolded, the shifting currents of European politics would gradually reveal new potential adversaries and opportunities, subtly altering his diplomatic focus. A crucial, yet often overlooked aspect of the embassy was the recruitment of foreign specialists. Peter sought to entice skilled artisans, engineers, military officers, and sailors to come to Russia and share their expertise. He understood that simply observing was not enough. Russia needed to import human capital, individuals who could directly implement Western techniques and train a new generation of Russian professionals. These foreign experts would become vital cogs in the machinery of his future reforms. Travelling under the assumed name of Peter Mikhailov, a mere bombardier, the Tsar aimed to avoid the elaborate protocols and time-consuming formalities typically associated with a reigning monarch. This allowed him an unparalleled freedom to immerse himself in the daily life and industrial workings of the countries he visited. From the shipyards of Zaandam to the bustling docks of England, Peter intended to learn by doing, to touch, to build, to dismantle, and to understand the very essence of Western ingenuity. This journey was not merely a diplomatic tour, it was a personal odyssey of discovery, designed to unlock the secrets of European power and bring them back to transform a sleeping giant. Under the simple guise of Peter Mikhailov, the Russian Tsar began his extraordinary immersion into the practical world of Western industry. His journey through the Dutch Republic proved particularly formative, especially his time in the bustling shipbuilding town of Zaandam. Here, amidst the rhythmic sounds of hammers and saws, Peter shed the robes of royalty and donned the working clothes of a common shipwright. He lived in a small rented cottage, ate simple fare, and rose with the sun to join the labourers in the shipyards. This deliberate act of incognito travel was far more than a whimsical eccentricity. It was a strategic choice born of his deep-seated pragmatism. Peter understood that true knowledge lay not in theoretical discussions or formal presentations, but in the direct physical engagement with the craft. He spent weeks learning the intricacies of shipbuilding, from selecting the timber and shaping the planks to understanding the complex geometry of a hull. He observed the efficient division of labour, the specialised tools, and the advanced techniques that allowed the Dutch to construct formidable vessels with such speed and precision. His hands-on approach extended beyond shipbuilding. Peter diligently studied navigation, visited mills and factories, and even apprenticed himself to a surgeon, dissecting cadavers to understand human anatomy, whereas his relentless curiosity knew no bounds, and he meticulously filled notebooks with sketches, observations, and technical details. He was not merely a tourist, he was a student, driven by an almost desperate urgency to master the skills he believed were essential for Russia's future. The journey continued to England, where Peter's fascination with naval architecture deepened further. He spent significant time at the Royal Navy dockyards in Deptford, near London, under the guidance of prominent shipbuilders. Here, he delved into the more advanced aspects of warship construction, particularly the design of larger, more heavily armed vessels. He meticulously examined naval arsenals, observed cannon foundries, and studied the organisational structure of the British Admiralty. While his true identity was an open secret to many European courts and officials, Peter steadfastly maintained his pretense, allowing him an unparalleled freedom to interact with ordinary people and skilled craftsmen. This direct observation of Western technology and the practical application of scientific principles profoundly shaped his understanding of what a modern state could achieve. He witnessed firsthand the power of innovation, the efficiency of organized labor, and the clear link between technological advancement and national strength. The quiet lessons learned in these shipyards and workshops would soon echo through the vast expanse of Russia. Beyond the gritty reality of the shipyards, the Grand Embassy also afforded Peter the great crucial opportunities for high-level diplomatic engagement and intellectual discourse. While maintaining his incognito status as much as possible, he nonetheless met with several European monarchs, though often informally, to discuss matters of state, alliances, and the broader political landscape. In the Dutch Republic he conversed with William III, then Stadtholder of the Netherlands and King of England. These discussions touched upon naval power, trade routes, and the intricate balance of power in Europe, all subjects of immense interest to the ambitious Tsar. Peter observed the Dutch system of governance, their advanced mercantile economy, and their formidable maritime capabilities, absorbing lessons that would later inform his own reforms in Russia. Later, during his time in England, Peter was formally received by King William III. Their meetings were a blend of diplomatic protocol and Peter's characteristic directness. He questioned the king on military organisation, naval administration, and the principles of parliamentary rule, though the latter concept remained somewhat alien to his autocratic sensibilities. Peter was particularly interested in the structure and discipline of the English army and navy, seeking to understand the mechanisms that made them so effective. He saw in these Western powers not just advanced technology, but also sophisticated administrative frameworks that supported their strength. His journey also brought him into contact with leading intellectuals and scientists of the era. He visited universities, observed scientific experiments, and engaged in discussions with scholars, absorbing new ideas across a spectrum of disciplines. From astronomy and mathematics to cartography and engineering, Peter's mind was a sponge, soaking up knowledge that had largely been absent from insulated Russia. He recognized the profound role of education and scientific inquiry in driving national progress. These encounters were not merely polite exchanges, they were intensive learning sessions for Peter. He was constantly evaluating, comparing, and planning how these foreign ideas and practices could be adapted and implemented in Russia. He sought not just to copy, but to understand the underlying principles of Western success, their military strategies, their administrative efficiency, their legal systems, and their economic dynamism. The seeds of Russia's future reforms were sown in these quiet observations and profound discussions, far from the traditional halls of the Kremlin. The Grand Embassy, intended to be a longer sojourn, was abruptly cut short by disquieting news from Moscow. A new Streltsy rebellion had erupted, once again threatening the stability of the realm and challenging Peter's authority from afar. This uprising, fueled by resentment against Peter's westernizing reforms and the perceived neglect of traditional ways, was a direct affront to the Tsar, reminding him of the deep-seated resistance within his own country. Peter, then in Vienna, immediately curtailed his journey and hastened back to Russia. His return was swift and decisive. While the main rebellion had already been suppressed by loyal forces before his arrival, Peter was determined to make a profound statement. He saw this latest Streltsy uprising not merely as an act of insubordination, but as a final, desperate attempt by the old guard to cling to a past he was determined to dismantle. The suppression that followed was exceptionally brutal, even by the standards of the time. Peter personally participated in interrogations and executions, displaying a grim resolve. Hundreds of Streltsy were put to death, their bodies displayed publicly as a chilling warning against further dissent. This was more than a punitive measure. It was a symbolic act of annihilation against a force that had long represented the conservative, often disruptive, elements of Old Muscovy. The Streltsy regiments, once the traditional military backbone of the Russian state, were formally disbanded, their very existence erased. Beyond the physical executions, Peter initiated a series of symbolic acts designed to underscore the definitive break with the past. So he ordered the forced shaving of beards, a deeply significant marker of Russian Orthodox identity, and decreed that traditional Russian dress be replaced by European attire. These were not minor reforms. They were direct assaults on the cultural and religious symbols that defined old Russia, intended to force a visual and psychological transformation upon his subjects. The Streltsy's last stand thus became the catalyst for Peter's most radical and uncompromising push towards a new, westernized Russia, forged through an assertive will and often through severe measures. Upon his return from the Grand Embassy, with the Streltsy rebellion decisively quelled, Peter the Great immediately turned his attention to visible, symbolic reforms that aimed to physically alter the appearance of his subjects. He understood that to transform Russia into a modern European power, the outward manifestations of Old Muscovy had to be shed. One of the most striking and controversial of these reforms was the beard tax. For centuries the beard had been a profound symbol of piety, masculinity, and traditional Russian identity, deeply intertwined with Orthodox Christian beliefs. To shave one's beard was considered a grave sin by many. Peter, however, viewed the long, flowing beards of the boyars and commoners alike as a sign of backwardness, a visible barrier to Russia's integration into European society. He ordered all men, except for the clergy and peasants, to shave their beards. Those who wished to retain them were required to pay an annual tax with different rates for different social classes. To enforce this decree, Peter's agents would sometimes forcibly shave the beards of those who resisted, using sharp razors in public squares. This act, deeply offensive to many, symbolized a direct challenge to the sacred traditions of the past. Hand in hand with the beard tax came the mandate for Western-style dress. Traditional Russian clothing, characterized by long, flowing robes and tunics, was deemed unfashionable and impractical by Peter. He decreed that the nobility, officials, and town dwellers must adopt European garments, German-style coats, French waistcoats, and breeches. Uniforms for the military and civil service were also designed in the European fashion. Peter himself would sometimes cut the sleeves of his courtiers' traditional robes to demonstrate his impatience with the old ways. These reforms were not merely about aesthetics. They carried a profound symbolic weight. They were tools of social engineering, designed to break the psychological hold of tradition and visibly align Russia with Western Europe. By forcing his subjects to adopt new appearances, Peter aimed to instill a new mindset, to literally reshape his people into modern Europeans. Resistance was met with swift and often harsh penalties, underscoring Peter's unyielding determination to drag Russia, sometimes unwillingly, into a new era. These highly visible changes were a clear declaration of his intent, marking a forceful departure from the insular customs of the past. Among Peter's most enduring and strategically significant achievements was the systematic creation of the Russian Navy. His early experiences on Lake Pleshcheyevo, his practical work in the shipyards of Western Europe during the Grand Embassy, and the hard lessons learned during the Azov campaigns had convinced him that a powerful maritime force was indispensable for Russia's future. Without access to warm water ports and the ability to project power across the seas, Russia would remain an isolated and vulnerable continental state. The founding of the Navy began with immense effort and considerable sacrifice. Shipyards were established in various locations, most notably in Voronezh on the Don River and later on the Baltic Sea. Peter personally supervised the construction, often working alongside carpenters and engineers, demonstrating his deep understanding of naval architecture and his relentless drive. Foreign shipwrights, navigators, and officers were recruited from Europe, bringing with them invaluable expertise and experience. Russian serfs and commoners were conscripted in vast numbers to serve as labourers and sailors, enduring harsh conditions and rigorous training. The initial focus was on building a fleet for the Black Sea, primarily for defence against the Ottoman Empire and to secure the gains made in the Azov campaigns. However, Peter's strategic vision soon expanded to encompass the Baltic Sea, which would become the main theatre for his new naval power. This required not only the construction of warships, but also the establishment of naval academies, the development of a logistical infrastructure, and the creation of a system for officer training. The strategic importance of this new navy was multifaceted. For trade, it would open up direct maritime routes to Western Europe, or bypassing traditional land-based networks that were often slow, costly, and vulnerable. For defence, a robust fleet would protect Russia's newly acquired coastal territories and deter potential invaders. And for projecting power, the navy would allow Russia to assert its influence beyond its land borders, transforming it from a purely continental entity into a formidable sea power. The creation of the Russian navy was a monumental undertaking, fundamentally altering Russia's geopolitical standing and laying the groundwork for its emergence as a major player on the European and global stage. It was a testament to Peter's unwavering commitment to modernizing and strengthening his nation. Beyond the dramatic birth of the navy, Peter the Great simultaneously embarked on a profound and comprehensive reorganization of the Russian army, transforming it from a semi-feudal militia into a modern professional fighting force. This military reform was not merely an adjustment, it was a complete overhaul, foundational to all his later strategic ambitions and successes. The core of this transformation lay in the systematic implementation of conscription. Unlike the previous system, which relied on noble retinues and irregular levies, Peter introduced a regular system of recruitment, drawing soldiers from all social strata, primarily from the peasantry. Each community was required to provide a certain number of recruits, who would then serve for life, creating a permanent standing army. This ensured a constant supply of manpower, allowing for the scaling up of military operations to an unprecedented degree. Once conscripted, these new soldiers underwent rigorous, standardized training. Peter had observed Western military drills and tactics during his travels, and he meticulously applied these principles. Regiments were drilled in close order formation, musketry, and artillery handling, moving away from the more disorganized fighting styles of the past. Barracks were built, and a strict disciplinary code was enforced, designed to forge disciplined and cohesive units. Alongside training, the army's weaponry was modernized and standardized. Old and varied armaments were replaced with uniform muskets, bayonets, and artillery pieces, often manufactured in newly established Russian armories or imported from Europe. This standardization simplified logistics, improved efficiency in the field, and enhanced the overall firepower of the Russian forces. Perhaps one of the most critical elements of Peter's military reforms was the creation of a professional officer corps. Historically, officership had often been based on birth or personal connections. Peter, however, emphasized merit and training. He established military schools such as the Artillery School and the Naval Academy to educate young nobles and even talented commoners in military science, tactics, and engineering. Foreign officers were initially employed to provide expertise, but Peter's ultimate goal was to cultivate a native Russian officer class capable of leading a modern army. Promotion was increasingly tied to service and ability rather than aristocratic lineage, though nobility still held significant advantages. This newly reorganized army, disciplined, well-equipped, and led by a more professional corps of officers, it would become the instrument through which Peter would secure Russia's access to the Baltic Sea and establish the empire as a dominant power in Northern Europe. It was a transformation that demanded immense resources and reshaped Russian society in fundamental ways, laying a resilient foundation for future military endeavours. With his internal reforms steadily progressing and a nascent navy alongside a newly modernised army at his command, Peter the Great turned his gaze outward towards the fulfilment of his grandest strategic ambition, securing Russia's permanent access to the sea. This aspiration, however, placed him on a collision course with the dominant power of the Baltic region, the Swedish Empire. Thus began the Great Northern War, or a conflict that would define much of Peter's reign and profoundly reshape the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. The year 1700 marked the formal commencement of this immense struggle, a war that would rage for over 2 decades, until 1721. Sweden, under the formidable young King Charles XII, was at the zenith of its military power. It controlled key territories along the Baltic coast, including Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, and Finland, effectively landlocking Russia and controlling all major maritime trade routes in the region. For Russia, breaking this Swedish stranglehold was not merely a matter of prestige. It was seen as an existential necessity for economic development, military security, and integration into the European state system. Peter understood that Russia's future as a significant European power hinged on its ability to navigate the seas. Without ice-free ports and direct maritime links to Western Europe, Russia remained isolated, its trade routes limited, and its influence constrained. The Baltic Sea, therefore, represented not just a body of water, but a gateway to prosperity and power. The Great Northern War was not initially a Russian solo endeavour. Peter had forged an alliance with Augustus II of Saxony and Poland-Lithuania, and Frederick IV of Denmark-Norway, forming a coalition aimed at dismantling Swedish supremacy. Each ally had their own grievances and territorial ambitions against Sweden, but for Peter the overarching goal remained the establishment of a secure Russian presence on the Baltic coast. This was to be no swift campaign, but a desperate and prolonged struggle. Sweden possessed a highly professional army, renowned for its discipline and aggressive tactics, led by a monarch who was a military genius. Peter's newly forged forces, though improving, were still largely untested against such an adversary. The initial engagements would prove to be harsh lessons, underscoring the immense challenge that lay before Russia and the sheer determination that would be required to achieve its long-sought maritime ambitions. The stage was set for a monumental contest, one that would test the very limits of Peter's resolve and the endurance of the Russian nation. The Great Northern War began with an immediate and profoundly humbling defeat for Russia, a moment that could have shattered the ambitions of a lesser leader. This pivotal event, known as the Battle of Narva, unfolded in November of 1700. Peter, eager to secure a foothold on the Baltic coast, had personally led a large Russian army, estimated at around 35,000 men, to besiege the Swedish fortress city of Narva in Ingria. His objective was clear: to capture this strategic port and thereby gain a direct outlet to the sea. However, the Russian army, despite its recent reforms, was still a heterogeneous force. Many units were newly raised, poorly trained, and lacked significant combat experience against a first-rate European power. Furthermore, the command structure was complex, with a significant number of foreign officers whose loyalty and competence were sometimes questionable. Just days before the battle, Peter, perhaps underestimating the immediate threat or needing to attend to other pressing matters, entrusted command to Duke Charles Eugène de Croÿ and departed for Novgorod, a decision he would undoubtedly come to regret. King Charles XII of Sweden, a brilliant and audacious military commander, moved with astonishing speed. With a much smaller, yet highly disciplined and battle-hardened force of approximately 8,000 men, he marched through the severe winter conditions to relieve Narva. On November 30th, under the cover of a blinding snowstorm, the Swedish army launched a surprise attack on the Russian siege lines. The elements played a crucial role. The driving snow and strong winds blew directly into the faces of the Russian defenders, severely hindering their visibility and making it difficult to operate their firearms. The Swedish assault was swift and devastating. The Russian lines, particularly those comprised of the less experienced recruits, quickly broke. Panic spread through the ranks. Many foreign officers, sensing the imminent collapse, either fled or surrendered, further demoralizing the Russian troops. The ensuing rout was catastrophic. Thousands of Russian soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The army suffered immense losses in artillery, supplies, and morale. The Battle of Narva was a crushing blow, an undeniable testament to the superior training, discipline, and leadership of the Swedish army. It exposed the stark deficiencies that still plagued Peter's nascent military. Yet, this devastating setback did not break Peter. Instead, it served as a brutal yet invaluable lesson. The defeat ignited within him an even fiercer resolve. He recognized the urgent need for more fundamental and radical reforms, an even greater commitment to training, and the complete overhaul of his military and administrative systems. Narva was not the end of his ambition, but rather a crucible from which a more formidable and ultimately victorious Russia would begin to emerge. The crushing defeat at Narva served as a stark and undeniable demonstration of Russia's industrial shortcomings. To effectively wage a prolonged war against a formidable power like Sweden, Peter understood that Russia could no longer rely solely on imported armaments or the limited output of its existing antiquated workshops. A modern army required a modern industrial base, capable of producing weapons, ammunition, and equipment on an unprecedented scale. With characteristic determination, Peter initiated a sweeping program of industrial development, directly linking it to the exigencies of the Great Northern War. His focus was intensely practical and strategic. The priority was the establishment of factories that could directly support the military effort, transforming Russia from an importer of vital war materials into a self-sufficient, even exporting power. Key to this ambition was the rapid expansion of Russia's metallurgical industry. Peter directed considerable resources towards the development of ironworks, particularly in the resource-rich Urals region. This vast area, with its abundant iron ore deposits and extensive forests for charcoal production, became the heartland of Russia's new industrial might. New foundries and blast furnaces were constructed at an astonishing pace, often with the assistance of foreign engineers and technicians who brought with them the latest European methods of extraction and processing. These enterprises were frequently established through state initiative, sometimes utilizing serf labor or state peasants, reflecting the centralized and coercive nature of Peter's reforms. Beyond raw iron production, Peter also invested heavily in armament factories. Cannon foundries, musket workshops, and gunpowder mills sprang up across the country, particularly in the central regions and near the new Baltic territories. These facilities were designed to produce standardized weapons and ammunition for the reformed army and navy. The output was staggering. Within a relatively short period, Russia's capacity to produce artillery pieces, firearms, and other military hardware increased exponentially. This rapid industrialization was not merely about replacing losses from Narva, it was about building a sustained capability to fight and win. By fueling his war machine with domestically produced goods, Peter not only reduced Russia's reliance on external powers, but also laid the foundational groundwork for a more robust and diversified Russian economy, forever altering the nation's industrial landscape. Even amidst the ongoing Great Northern War, with its immense demands on resources and manpower, Peter harboured an even grander vision: the establishment of a new capital, a city that would embody his radical reforms and serve as Russia's direct connection to the European world. In 1703, on lands recently wrested from Swedish control at the mouth of the Neva River, he dramatically commenced the construction of St. Petersburg. The choice of location was deliberate and profoundly strategic. Situated in the marshy, often inhospitable delta where the Neva met the Gulf of Finland, St. Petersburg offered an unparalleled gateway to the Baltic Sea. This was the very access Peter had so long coveted, and for which he was fighting Sweden. The city was to be a fortified port, a naval base, and a commercial hub, securing Russia's presence on the Baltic and facilitating maritime trade with Western Europe. But St. Petersburg was more than a military or economic necessity. It was a potent symbol. Moscow, with its ancient Kremlin and deep-rooted traditions, represented the old, insular Russia that Peter was determined to transform. St. Petersburg, by contrast, was conceived as a deliberately European city, built from scratch on a blank slate. Its architecture, its layout, and its very spirit were to reflect Western ideals of order, rationality, and modernity. It was to be Russia's window to the West, a physical manifestation of Peter's ambition to integrate his empire into the broad currents of European civilization. The founding of the city was an undertaking of immense scale and human cost. Thousands upon thousands of serfs and conscripted labourers were forced to drain swamps, fell forests, and lay foundations in the harsh northern climate. Disease, starvation, and exhaustion claimed countless lives during the early years of construction. Yet, Peter remained unyielding in his resolve. He personally supervised aspects of its development, driving the project forward with relentless energy. By 1712, despite the ongoing war and the immense challenges, Peter formally moved the capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg. This act was a powerful declaration, signalling a decisive break with the past and an unwavering commitment to a European future for Russia. The new capital, rising from the northern marshes, stood as a monumental testament to Peter's will and his vision for a transformed empire. The grandeur of St. Petersburg, with its European-inspired architecture and strategic location, came at a profound and often overlooked cost. The very foundations of this ambitious new capital were laid upon immense human suffering, a silent testament to the ruthlessness of Peter's vision. The chosen site, the Neva River Delta, was a desolate and challenging environment. It was a vast expanse of marshland prone to flooding, with a harsh, damp climate and little in the way of natural resources suitable for construction. To transform this wilderness into a thriving city required an extraordinary mobilization of labor. Tens of thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands, of conscripted laborers were compelled to work on the project. These were primarily serfs, soldiers, and criminals, drawn from across the vast Russian Empire. They arrived with minimal tools and often insufficient provisions, tasked with draining swamps, felling trees, quarrying stone, and constructing fortifications and buildings from the ground up. The conditions were brutal. Workers toiled in extreme weather, from the freezing winds and deep snows of winter to the sweltering mosquito-ridden humidity of summer. Malnutrition was widespread, and sanitation was virtually non-existent. The combination of back-breaking labour, inadequate food, poor shelter, and the prevalence of disease, as particularly malaria and dysentery, led to staggering mortality rates. Many perished from exhaustion, exposure, or illness, their bodies often interred directly into the very soil they had been forced to reshape. The human cost of St. Petersburg's creation was so immense that contemporary accounts and later historical estimates speak of tens of thousands, if not more, losing their lives during the initial decades of construction. The city earned a grim nickname among some, a city built on bones. Peter, driven by his singular purpose, remained largely indifferent to this suffering, viewing the lives of his subjects as expendable resources in the service of the state's greater goals. For him, the strategic and symbolic importance of St. Petersburg transcended individual hardship, making the relentless push for its completion a non-negotiable imperative, regardless of the human sacrifice involved. The immense pressures of the Great Northern War, coupled with the ongoing societal transformations, exposed the inherent inefficiencies of Russia's antiquated administrative system. Peter the Great recognized that a modern state capable of sustaining a large army and navy and implementing sweeping reforms required a governmental structure far more streamlined and effective than the centuries-old traditional institutions. His focus shifted towards creating a centralized meritocratic bureaucracy. The ancient Boyar Duma, a council of aristocratic advisors, was gradually rendered obsolete. Its informal structure and reliance on hereditary privilege were ill-suited to Peter's vision of efficient governance. In its place, in 1711, he established the governing Senate. This body was designed to oversee all aspects of state administration during Peter's frequent absences on campaign or abroad. It was composed of 9 appointed members, chosen by the Tsar for their competence and loyalty, rather than their noble lineage. The Senate was endowed with broad legislative, administrative, and judicial powers intended to ensure the continuous functioning of the state and the enforcement of the Tsar's decrees. Further solidifying this bureaucratic overhaul, Peter introduced a system of colleges in 1718, drawing inspiration from Swedish and German models. These were essentially specialized ministries, each responsible for a specific area of state administration, such as foreign affairs, war, admiralty, justice, finance, and trade. Yet, unlike the previous unwieldy prikazi, or departments, the colleges were structured with a collegial decision-making process, involving a president, vice president, and several councillors. This design was intended to foster greater accountability, reduce corruption, and improve the expertise within each governmental branch. The establishment of the Senate and the colleges marked a significant departure from traditional Russian governance. It was a deliberate move towards a more rational, hierarchical, and functionally specialized administration. Peter sought to replace arbitrary decision-making with standardized procedures and to promote individuals based on their skills and service to the state, rather than solely on their birthright. This shift was a cornerstone of his efforts to transform Russia into a powerful, modern European state, incapable of projecting its influence both militarily and politically. To further cement the principles of meritocracy within his reformed state, Peter the Great introduced one of his most transformative and enduring innovations, the table of ranks. Promulgated in 1722, this comprehensive system fundamentally reshaped the structure of Russian society and government service. It replaced the traditional emphasis on aristocratic lineage as the primary determinant of status and position, with a clear hierarchical ladder of service open to all free men. The table of ranks classified all military, civil, and court positions into 14 distinct grades or ranks. Each rank, from the lowest to the highest, corresponded to a specific level of authority and privilege. To advance through these ranks, an individual had to demonstrate competence, dedication, and loyalty through actual service to the state. This system applied uniformly across the army, navy, and civil administration, creating a standardized path for career progression. Crucially, the table of ranks offered an unprecedented opportunity for social mobility. An individual, regardless of their birth, could enter state service at the lowest rank and through diligent work and demonstrated ability ascend the hierarchy. Reaching a certain rank automatically conferred hereditary nobility, thus allowing commoners to elevate their families into the aristocracy. This was a radical departure from the established order, which had largely confined noble status to those born into it. Peter's motivations were pragmatic. He sought to create a professional, effective bureaucracy and military, staffed by capable individuals rather than by those whose only qualification was their name. By incentivizing merit and loyalty, he aimed to break the power of the old boyar aristocracy, whose influence had often hindered royal authority and reform efforts. The table of ranks ensured that the most talented and dedicated individuals, irrespective of their social origins, could contribute to the state's development and secure their own advancement. This system effectively tied the nobility to state service, compelling them to serve if they wished to maintain or enhance their status. For those of humbler origins, it provided a powerful incentive to pursue education and develop skills, knowing that a path to influence and prestige was now open. The table of ranks thus became a cornerstone of the patrine state, a powerful instrument for social engineering that profoundly influenced Russian society for nearly 2 centuries, fostering a culture of service and merit within the expanding imperial administration. Peter the Great's relentless drive for centralized control and modernization extended even to the spiritual realm, leading to profound reforms within the Russian Orthodox Church. For centuries, the Patriarch of Moscow had held significant independent authority, sometimes challenging the power of the Tsar. This dual power structure, reminiscent of earlier conflicts between secular and spiritual leaders in other European nations, was an anathema to Peter's vision of an absolute unified state. Following the death of Patriarch Adrian in 1700, Peter deliberately refrained from appointing a successor. For over 2 decades, the patriarchal see remained vacant, with the church administered by a temporary locum tenens. This period allowed Peter to consolidate his plans and gradually undermine the independent power base of the church. He saw the church's vast landholdings and its traditional autonomy as obstacles to his reforms, and a potential source of opposition to his authority. In 1721, Peter formally abolished the Patriarchate altogether. In its place, he established the Holy Governing Synod, a collegial body composed of high-ranking clergy, all appointed by the Tsar. This new administrative structure effectively transformed the Russian Orthodox Church into a department of the state, placing it firmly under imperial control. To ensure the synod's subservience, a secular official, the chief procurator, was appointed by the Tsar to oversee its operations and act as the eye of the Tsar, reporting directly to him. This radical restructuring removed the Church's independent voice and its capacity to act as a counterweight to monarchical power. The Holy Synod was tasked not only with spiritual matters, but also with enforcing state policies, including the dissemination of imperial decrees and the monitoring of the populace. Priests were even compelled to report confessions of anti-state sentiment. The subordination of the Church was a critical component of Peter's vision for a modern absolutist state. It eliminated a potential rival power centre, brought the Church's considerable resources under state management, and ensured that the spiritual authority of the nation aligned seamlessly with the secular authority of the monarch. This reform profoundly shaped the relationship between church and state in Russia for nearly 2 centuries, solidifying the Tsar's supreme authority in all aspects of national life. The Great Northern War, a conflict that had consumed Peter's energies for nearly a decade, reached its definitive climax on the fields near Poltava in the summer of 1709. This battle would prove to be the turning point not only in the war but in Russia's emergence as a major European power. King Charles XII of Sweden, a military genius who had long seemed invincible, had led his army deep into Ukraine, seeking to draw Peter into a decisive engagement. However, the harsh Russian winter and relentless skirmishing had taken a heavy toll on the Swedish forces, weakening them considerably. By June 1709, the Swedish army, numbering around 20,000 men, had laid siege to the fortified town of Poltava. Peter, commanding a much larger and increasingly well-drilled Russian army of approximately 40,000, chose his ground carefully. He constructed a series of redoubts and defensive lines designed to channel and disrupt the Swedish advance, forcing them into a frontal assault against a prepared position. This was a departure from the more cautious tactics often employed by Russian commanders in earlier conflicts. On the morning of July 8, 1709, the Swedish army, despite its depleted state and the king's own recent injury, launched its attack. The initial Swedish thrust was fierce, but the Russian redoubts held, inflicting heavy casualties and disorganizing the Swedish formations. Peter himself was present on the battlefield, actively directing his troops, his presence a visible source of morale. He had learned much since the disaster at Narva, transforming his raw recruits into a disciplined and formidable fighting force, capable of executing complex maneuvers. As the battle progressed, the numerical superiority and superior artillery of the Russians began to tell. The Swedish cavalry, renowned for its prowess, found itself outmaneuvered and eventually overwhelmed. The Russian infantry, equipped and trained in the Western manner, stood firm against the once-feared Swedish charge. By mid-morning, the Swedish lines began to waver, then break. The retreat quickly turned into a rout, with thousands of Swedish soldiers killed, captured, or scattered. King Charles XII, severely wounded, managed to escape with a small contingent, eventually finding refuge in Ottoman territory. The bulk of his army, however, was trapped and forced to surrender days later at Prevolochna. The Battle of Poltava was an unmitigated disaster for Sweden and a colossal triumph for Russia. It shattered the myth of Swedish invincibility, marked the end of Sweden's dominance in northern Europe, and irrevocably shifted the balance of power on the continent. For Peter, it was the ultimate vindication of his ambitious military reforms and a testament to his unwavering determination. Russia had arrived on the European stage not as a peripheral power, but as a force to be reckoned with. The thunderous echoes of Poltava faded, leaving in their wake a dramatically altered geopolitical landscape. The decisive victory did more than simply win a battle. It irrevocably shifted the balance of power in northern Europe. Sweden, once the dominant force, now found its military might severely crippled and its imperial ambitions curtailed. For Russia, Poltava was the key that unlocked its long-sought access to the Baltic Sea, transforming a strategic dream into tangible reality. With the Swedish main army effectively neutralized, Peter seized the opportunity to consolidate his gains. The remaining Swedish strongholds along the Baltic coast became prime targets. Russian forces, emboldened by their success and now possessing considerable experience, systematically moved to capture these vital territories. Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, and parts of Karelia, all historically contested regions, fell under Russian control. These territories were not merely conquered, they were integrated into the growing Russian Empire, providing the essential coastline and harbours that Peter had envisioned for decades. The acquisition of these lands was crucial for the ongoing development of St. Petersburg. The new capital, still under construction, now had a secure hinterland and direct, undisputed access to the open sea. This allowed for the unimpeded flow of trade, the docking of the burgeoning Russian fleet, and the continued cultural and technological exchange with Western Europe. The Baltic ports, once Swedish gateways, now became Russian conduits, facilitating the very modernization Peter championed. The defeat of Charles XII also had a ripple effect across the region. Former Swedish allies, or those who had remained neutral out of fear of Swedish power, began to reconsider their positions. Denmark and Saxony, among others, re-entered the war against Sweden, forming a coalition that further isolated the weakened Swedish kingdom. Peter skillfully navigated these alliances, ensuring that Russia's interests remained paramount in the ongoing diplomatic and military maneuvers. The years following Poltava were characterized by a relentless drive to secure Russia's newfound Baltic dominance. Naval campaigns became increasingly important as the Russian fleet, built from Peter's own designs and often with his direct involvement, asserted its control over the Baltic waters. This naval supremacy was essential not only for defence, but also for projecting Russian power and protecting its maritime trade routes. By the time the Great Northern War finally concluded, more than a decade after Poltava, Russia's position as the preeminent power in the Baltic region was undeniable. The territories gained, the navy established, and the military proven all contributed to a profound transformation of Russia's geopolitical standing. The quiet determination that had driven Peter since his youth had culminated in a victory that reshaped the map of Europe. Beyond the immediate demands of war and statecraft, Peter harboured a deep conviction that Russia's future prosperity and strength lay in the cultivation of knowledge. He understood that a modern state required not only a formidable army and navy, but also an educated populace, capable of innovation and critical thought. This understanding propelled a series of far-reaching cultural and educational reforms, subtly touched by the burgeoning ideas of the European Enlightenment. Peter's efforts to promote education were systematic and often ambitious. He recognized the profound deficit of skilled professionals within Russia, particularly in technical fields. To address this, he established a network of specialized schools designed to train individuals for specific roles within his rapidly modernizing state. Among the most significant were the naval and engineering academies. The Naval Academy, founded in 1715 in St. Petersburg, was intended to produce officers capable of commanding his new Baltic fleet, teaching subjects from navigation and cartography to shipbuilding and artillery. Similarly, engineering schools aim to create experts in fortification, bridge building, and industrial processes, all vital for both military success and economic development. These institutions were distinct from the traditional church schools, focusing instead on practical secular knowledge. Attendance was often compulsory for young noblemen, a radical departure from previous norms, reflecting Peter's belief that service to the state began with proper training. He also encouraged the establishment of arithmetic and grammar schools throughout the country, albeit with limited success in broad implementation, laying the groundwork for a more widespread educational system. Beyond formal schooling, Peter actively encouraged scientific inquiry. He invited foreign scholars and scientists to Russia, recognizing their expertise as invaluable for jump-starting domestic research. His most enduring contribution to scientific advancement was the establishment of the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. Though formally founded in the final year of his life, in 1724 its conceptualization and planning had occupied Peter for many years. He envisioned it not merely as a learned society, but as a comprehensive institution that would combine research, teaching, and practical application. It was designed to host leading European scientists, who would not only conduct their own investigations, but also train Russian students in various disciplines, from astronomy and mathematics to natural history and technology. This commitment to scientific institutions and technical education represented a fundamental shift in Russian intellectual life. Peter's reforms sought to drag Russia out of intellectual isolation, fostering a new class of educated professionals who could contribute to the nation's progress. His vision, though sometimes enforced with characteristic severity, laid the essential foundations for Russia's eventual emergence as a significant player in the European intellectual landscape, subtly influenced by the spirit of rational inquiry that defined the Enlightenment. Peter's relentless drive to integrate Russia into the European sphere extended even to the most fundamental aspects of daily life, including the measurement of time and the written word itself. These seemingly minor adjustments held profound symbolic and practical significance, further aligning Russia with the Western world. One of the most immediate and impactful reforms was the introduction of the Julian calendar. Prior to Peter's decree in 1699, Russia had used a Byzantine calendar that dated the year from the creation of the world, starting on September 1st. This system placed Russia thousands of years ahead of Europe, creating a constant disjunction in correspondence, diplomacy, and trade. With a stroke of his pen, Peter mandated that the year 7208 from the creation of the world would cease on December 31st, and the very next day, January 1st, would mark the beginning of the year 1700 AD. This brought Russia into chronological sync with most of Protestant Europe, simplifying international relations and fostering a sense of shared temporality. The change was met with some confusion and resistance, particularly from those who viewed it as an affront to religious tradition, but Peter's will prevailed, demonstrating his absolute authority even over the passage of time. Concurrent with the calendar reform, Peter also undertook a significant reform of the Russian alphabet, introducing what became known as the civil script, or Grazdanka, and the traditional Church Slavonic script, while beautiful and historically significant, was complex, adorned with numerous ligatures and diacritics, making it cumbersome for printing secular texts and for widespread literacy. Peter, with his practical mindset, sought to simplify the alphabet, making it more legible and easier to learn. He personally participated in the design of the new characters, removing archaic letters, simplifying others, and introducing a more Romanized aesthetic to some forms. The civil script was primarily intended for secular publications, such as government decrees, newspapers, and educational materials, while Church Slavonic remained in use for religious texts. This distinction reflected Peter's broader policy of separating church and state functions. The simplified alphabet facilitated the printing of books and documents, supporting his educational initiatives and the dissemination of information. It made reading and writing more accessible, thereby playing a crucial role in the gradual westernization of Russian culture and intellectual life. Through these reforms, Peter not only altered the way Russians mark their days, but also fundamentally reshaped the very tools of their communication, pushing his vast empire ever closer to the European model he so admired. While Peter's reforms were sweeping and often imposed with unyielding determination, they did not unfold without significant opposition. The speed and radical nature of his changes, coupled with their immense cost in human and material terms, he inevitably stirred deep currents of resentment and resistance across various strata of Russian society. The old ways held strong appeal for many, representing stability, tradition, and a familiar order that Peter was intent on dismantling. Conservative elements within the nobility, who valued their ancient privileges and the established hierarchy, often viewed Peter's meritocratic table of ranks and his demands for service as an erosion of their birthright. They chafed under the obligation to serve the state, often in distant and harsh conditions, and resented the elevation of commoners based on skill rather than lineage. Many quietly resisted, dragging their feet on assignments or subtly undermining his directives, clinging to the hope that these turbulent times would pass. The Orthodox Church, too, found itself in direct conflict with Peter's vision. His secularizing tendencies, the abolition of the Patriarchate, and the establishment of the Holy Synod under state control were seen by many clergy and devout believers as an assault on the spiritual independence of Russia and a deviation from sacred traditions. Sermons often subtly, or sometimes overtly, criticized the Tsar's westernizing reforms, portraying him in some extreme interpretations as the Antichrist. The beard tax, the calendar change, and the adoption of European dress were not merely superficial alterations, but were perceived as impious acts that threatened the very soul of Russia. Among the vast peasantry, the burdens of Peter's ceaseless warfare and ambitious construction projects were immense. Conscription into the army, forced labour on canals and in St. Petersburg, and increasingly heavy taxation led to widespread suffering and despair. For many serfs, life was already arduous, and Peter's demands pushed them to the brink. These grievances frequently erupted into localized disturbances, protests against tax collectors, or flights to the peripheries of the empire. One of the most significant expressions of this widespread discontent was the Bulovin Rebellion, which erupted in 1707. Led by Kondraty Bulovin, a Don Cossack ataman, this uprising was fueled by a complex mix of grievances. The flight of serfs to the Don region to escape Peter's increasingly harsh policies, the government's attempts to reclaim these runaways, and the general oppression felt by the Cossacks whose traditional freedoms were being curtailed. The rebellion quickly spread, attracting not only Cossacks but also runaway serfs, or old believers and disgruntled elements from the lower classes. It became a large-scale peasant war, threatening the stability of Peter's southern borders at a critical juncture in the Great Northern War. Peter was forced to divert significant military resources to suppress the uprising, which ultimately took over 2 years of brutal fighting to quell. The Bulovin Rebellion served as a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of forced modernization, deep-seated resistance simmered, a constant undercurrent to Peter's transformative reign. Amidst the vast and often violent currents of state reform and international conflict, Peter the Great also faced a profound and deeply personal tragedy within his own family, the escalating conflict with his eldest son and heir, Tsarevich Alexis. This was not merely a generational disagreement, but a clash of worldviews that threatened the very future of Peter's reformed Russia. Alexis, born to Peter's first wife, Eudoxia Lopukhina, represented in many ways the very traditions his father sought to dismantle. He was a quiet, introspective young man, drawn to religious piety and the conservative elements of the Russian court that resisted Peter's radical westernization. He lacked his father's boundless energy, his passion for military matters, and his hands-on approach to governance. Peter, who had envisioned his son as a continuation of his reformist legacy, grew increasingly frustrated by Alexis's apparent lack of interest in state affairs, his perceived idleness, and his alignment with those who yearned for the old ways. The relationship between father and son deteriorated into an irreconcilable chasm. Peter subjected Alexis to harsh criticism and demanding tasks, hoping to instill in him the same drive and modern outlook that defined his own life. Yet these efforts only seemed to push Alexis further into withdrawal and resentment. He became a focal point for all those who secretly opposed Peter's reforms, a silent hope for a return to a more traditional Russia. In 1716, feeling increasingly threatened and cornered by his father's demands that he either embrace reform or become a monk, Alexis fled Russia. He sought refuge first in Vienna, under the protection of his brother-in-law Emperor Charles VI, and later in Naples. This act of defiance was a profound betrayal in Peter's eyes, a public rejection of his authority and his life's work. Peter, relentless in his pursuit, dispatched agents to bring his son back. Through a combination of threats and promises of forgiveness, Alexis was persuaded to return to Russia in 1718. However, upon his arrival, the promises of clemency proved hollow. Peter initiated a brutal investigation, accusing Alexis of treason and conspiracy to overthrow him. The Tsarevich was interrogated under torture, forced to implicate his associates, and eventually condemned by a specially constituted court of high-ranking officials and clergy. On June 26, 1718, Alexis died in the Peter and Paul fortress in St. Petersburg, officially from apoplexy after suffering a final round of severe questioning. The precise circumstances of his death remain shrouded in historical ambiguity, with strong suggestions that he either succumbed to injuries sustained during torture or was secretly executed on his father's orders. This tragic end to the Tsarevich-Alexis affair eliminated Peter's most direct dynastic challenge, but it cast a long, dark shadow over his reign, revealing the absolute and often ruthless extent of his power and his unyielding commitment to his vision for Russia, even at the cost of his own son. The death of Tsarevich-Alexis, a culmination of years of bitter conflict, resolved the immediate problem of a rebellious heir, but simultaneously plunged Russia into a deeper, more insidious crisis, that of succession. With Alexis gone, Peter the Great found himself without a clear and undisputed male successor, a predicament that carried profound implications for the stability of his newly forged empire. Historically, the succession to the Russian throne had followed a clear pattern of primogeniture, passing from father to eldest son, or Alexis's execution or death under duress shattered this established order. While Peter had other children, notably from his second marriage to Catherine, none of his surviving sons lived beyond infancy. The only other direct male descendant was Alexis's own young son, Peter Alexeyevich, a grandson who was still a child and whose claim to the throne was complicated by his father's condemnation. This void at the heart of the imperial family was not merely a personal sorrow for Peter. It was a national problem of immense magnitude. The question of who would inherit the vast modernizing Russian state was paramount. Peter had poured his life's energy into transforming Russia, into making it a European power, and the thought of his reforms unravelling after his death due to an unstable succession was a constant pressing concern. In 1722, Peter attempted to address this precarious situation by issuing the Statute on Succession. This radical decree fundamentally altered the traditional succession laws, proclaiming that the reigning monarch had the right to appoint their own successor, regardless of birth order or gender. This measure was designed to prevent any return to the old ways by ensuring that only a successor fully committed to Peter's reforms could ascend the throne. It was a testament to his deep-seated fear that his life's work could be undone by a conservative heir. However, this statute, while intended to secure the future, inadvertently introduced a new element of instability. By removing the clear line of succession, it opened the door to court intrigues, factions, and potential coups, as future rulers would have to navigate the often unpredictable choices of the departing monarch or the machinations of powerful nobles. The succession crisis, therefore, became a powerful and enduring legacy of the Alexis affair. It underscored the profound personal toll that Peter's relentless reforms exacted, not only on his relationships, but also on the very foundations of the Russian state, creating an uncertainty that would echo through the decades following his death. The personal tragedy of a father and son had thus morphed into a systemic challenge for the entire nation. After 2 decades of relentless warfare, the long and arduous Great Northern War finally drew to a close with the signing of the Treaty of Nystad on August 30th, 1721. This monumental agreement, negotiated in the small Finnish town, thus marked a decisive and transformative moment in European history, fundamentally reshaping the balance of power on the continent. For Peter the Great, it represented the ultimate vindication of his ambitious vision and the culmination of his life's most significant military endeavour. The terms of the treaty solidified Russia's dramatic territorial gains. Sweden, once the dominant power of the Baltic, was forced to cede vast stretches of land to the Russian Empire. These included Ingria, Livonia, Estonia, and parts of Karelia, along with several islands in the Baltic Sea. Crucially, these acquisitions provided Russia with a secure and expansive coastline along the Baltic, granting Peter the long-sought window to Europe that had been the primary objective of the entire conflict. The city of St. Petersburg, painstakingly built on marshlands, was now firmly within Russian territory, its strategic importance undeniably cemented. The Treaty of Nystad was more than just a redistribution of land. It was a formal recognition of Russia's new status on the international stage. Sweden's imperial ambitions in the east were definitively curtailed, and its position as a great power diminished. Conversely, Russia, under Peter's resolute leadership, emerged from the war as the undisputed hegemon of the Baltic region and a major European power, a force to be reckoned with in the intricate diplomacy and military calculations of the continent. The celebrations in Russia following the signing were profound and widespread. Peter himself orchestrated elaborate festivities, including parades, banquets, and fireworks, to commemorate this hard-won peace. The Senate, in a gesture of profound recognition, bestowed upon him the titles of Father of the Fatherland, Emperor, and the Great. These honorifics were not merely ceremonial. They formally acknowledged the transformative impact of his reign and his pivotal role in elevating Russia to an imperial power. The peace secured at Nystad allowed Peter to shift his focus, at least temporarily, from military campaigns to the further consolidation of his domestic reforms and the development of his newly acquired territories. The treaty was a testament to the effectiveness of his modern army and navy, the resilience of his people, and his own unyielding determination. It marked the definitive end of an era of Swedish dominance and the dawn of a new age for Russia, firmly established as an integral and powerful player in the European system. Or with the Great Northern War concluded and the Treaty of Nystad formally signed, Russia stood on the precipice of a new era. The military victories and territorial acquisitions had not merely expanded the nation's borders, they had fundamentally altered its standing in the world. Recognizing this profound transformation, the Russian Senate and the Holy Synod, the highest governing bodies of the state and church respectively, moved to formally acknowledge Peter's unparalleled achievements and Russia's new imperial status. On October 22nd, 1721, a solemn and significant ceremony took place in Trinity Cathedral in St. Petersburg. Following a celebratory service, the Senate, led by Chancellor Gavril Golovkin, presented Peter with an address, formally requesting that he accept the titles of Father of the Fatherland, Emperor of all Russia, and the Great. This was a carefully orchestrated moment designed to legitimize and celebrate the culmination of Peter's efforts and the elevation of the Russian state. Peter, in a characteristic display of measured acceptance, initially feigned humility, but ultimately consented to the titles. This acceptance was not a mere personal honor, it was a declaration to the world. The title Emperor carried immense weight in Europe, hearkening back to the Roman and Holy Roman Empires. It signified a sovereign power of the highest order, placing Russia on par with the most prestigious monarchies and empires of the West. No longer merely a tsardom, Russia was now officially an empire, a term that resonated with strength, authority, and expansive dominion. The adoption of these titles cemented Russia's identity as a modern European power, consciously shedding the vestiges of its more insular Muscovite past. It was a clear signal to other European courts that Russia was no longer a peripheral entity, but a central player whose interests and influence extended across the continent and beyond. The epithet "the Great," appended to his name, was a direct recognition of his extraordinary impact, placing him among the pantheon of history's most transformative rulers. This proclamation marked a symbolic end to one chapter of Peter's reign and the beginning of another. Having secured Russia's place on the map through military might and diplomatic acumen, he now held the formal title that reflected this new reality. The imperial era of Russia had officially begun, a legacy that would endure for 2 centuries, shaping the destiny of millions and profoundly influencing global affairs. Even after the monumental triumph of the Great Northern War and the formal proclamation of Russia as an empire, Peter's ambition for expansion and strategic advantage remained undiminished. His gaze, which had for so long been fixed on the Baltic, now turned southward and eastward towards the vast, rich territories bordering the Caspian Sea. This shift in focus was driven by a familiar blend of commercial opportunity, geopolitical strategy, and a desire to secure Russia's borders against potential threats. The decline of the Safavid dynasty in Persia presented Peter with a compelling opportunity. Internal unrest and external pressures had weakened the Persian state, creating a power vacuum in a region strategically important for trade routes to India and Central Asia. Peter saw the Caspian Sea not merely as a body of water, but as a gateway to these lucrative markets and a potential avenue for further Russian influence. In 1722, Peter launched the Persian Campaign, sometimes referred to as the Russo-Persian War or the Caspian Campaign. Leading a substantial force, including his newly developed Caspian flotilla, he personally participated in the expedition. The campaign was arduous, characterized by the harsh climate, difficult terrain, and the logistical challenges of supplying an army in a distant region. Despite these obstacles, Russian forces achieved significant successes, seizing key coastal cities and territories along the western and southern shores of the Caspian Sea, including Derbent and Baku. The campaign's objectives were multifaceted. Beyond securing trade routes, Peter aimed to establish Russian naval dominance on the Caspian, preventing other European powers from gaining a foothold and potentially threatening Russia's southern flanks. The territorial gains, formalized by the Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1723, brought new lands and peoples under Russian control, albeit temporarily. These acquisitions, though ultimately proving difficult to maintain due to disease and local resistance, demonstrated Peter's unwavering drive to extend Russia's reach and secure its strategic interests in every direction. This venture into the Caspian region underscored Peter's comprehensive vision for Russia. He sought not only to make Russia a European power, but also to position it as a significant player in Asian affairs, leveraging its unique geographical position. The Persian campaign, though less celebrated than the Great Northern War, was a testament to his persistent ambition and his belief in Russia's destiny as a vast, powerful empire with influence stretching across continents. The relentless pace of Peter the Great's life, marked by ceaseless reform, military campaigns, extensive travels, and an almost fanatical dedication to the transformation of Russia, began to take an irreversible toll on his formidable constitution in his later years. His health, once robust and seemingly impervious to hardship, started a slow, undeniable decline, foreshadowing the end of his extraordinary reign. From a young age, Peter had lived a life of strenuous physical activity. He was a man who embraced manual labour, whether building ships in shipyards, pulling teeth as an amateur dentist, or personally leading his troops into battle. He often disregarded personal comfort and safety, exposing himself to the elements and the rigours of campaigning alongside his soldiers. His lifestyle, characterised by irregular sleep, copious consumption of alcohol, and an often chaotic daily routine, further exacerbated the stresses on his body. Numerous accounts from his contemporaries describe his suffering from various ailments. He endured frequent fevers, bouts of chills, and intense headaches. Chronic urinary problems, likely kidney stones or a bladder infection, became increasingly debilitating in his final years, causing him excruciating pain. These conditions were almost certainly worsened by the primitive medical understanding and treatments of the era, which often involved harsh remedies that offered little genuine relief. Past injuries, too, contributed to his declining state. The physical demands of his military career and his hands-on approach to statecraft meant he was no stranger to accidents and physical trauma. Though details are often sparse, the cumulative effect of these various afflictions gradually eroded his physical strength, making his tireless work increasingly difficult. Despite the escalating pain and discomfort, Peter largely continued his demanding schedule, driven by an unyielding sense of duty and a fear that his reforms would falter without his constant vigilance. He remained actively involved in governance, military planning, and even his personal projects, pushing himself beyond the limits of human endurance. This unwavering commitment, while a testament to his iron will, ultimately hastened the deterioration of his health, paving the way for the inevitable conclusion of his remarkable life. The emperor who had reshaped a nation with his bare hands and relentless spirit was slowly being consumed by the very intensity of his existence. Amidst the grand sweep of his imperial ambitions and the relentless pressure of state reform, Peter the Great found a remarkably different kind of companionship and solace in the figure of Catherine, a woman of humble origins who would eventually become Empress of Russia. Their relationship stood in stark contrast to the traditional expectations of royal marriages, reflecting Peter's unconventional spirit and his tendency to value personal merit over inherited status. Catherine, born Marta Helena Skowronska, was a Lithuanian peasant who had been captured by Russian forces during the Great Northern War. Her path to Peter's side was circuitous, involving various household services before she caught the Tsar's eye. What began as an informal liaison gradually deepened into a profound personal bond. Catherine possessed a down-to-earth practicality, a calming presence, and an intuitive understanding of Peter's complex personality that seemed to soothe his often tempestuous nature. She was capable of managing his moods, offering comfort during his frequent illnesses, and even occasionally mediating in political disputes. Their relationship blossomed over many years, and they eventually married officially in 1712, a significant event that underscored Peter's disregard for conventional aristocratic alliances. This union elevated a commoner to the highest echelons of Russian society, demonstrating Peter's belief that an individual's character and capabilities were more important than their lineage. Catherine bore him numerous children, though only 2 daughters, Anna and Elizabeth, survived to adulthood. As Peter's health began its slow decline, Catherine's presence became even more crucial. She was often by his side, providing care and quiet support. Her influence grew not through overt political maneuvering, but through her steady presence and the deep personal trust Peter placed in her. She frequently accompanied him on campaigns and official journeys, a testament to their close partnership. This profound personal trust in Catherine, combined with his own tumultuous experiences regarding succession, particularly the tragic affair with his son Alexis, led Peter to enact a revolutionary decree in 1722. This law, known as the Statute on Succession, abolished the ancient tradition of primogeniture, which dictated that the eldest son automatically inherited the throne. Instead, Peter decreed that the reigning monarch had the right to choose their own successor, regardless of birth order or gender. This unprecedented move was designed to ensure that a worthy individual, someone truly capable of continuing his reforms and governing the vast Russian Empire, would ascend to the throne. It was a reflection of his meritocratic ideals and his deep-seated anxiety about the future stability of Russia. While intended to safeguard his legacy, this decree also inadvertently introduced a period of instability into Russian succession, as future monarchs would wrestle with the power to name their own heirs, often leading to internal strife and palace coups in the decades that followed. For Peter, however, it was a deeply personal choice, a final attempt to exert control over the destiny of his beloved Russia, even beyond his own lifetime. The relentless pace of Peter's life, marked by ceaseless travel, military campaigns, and an unyielding commitment to reform, eventually took an insurmountable toll on his formidable constitution. For years he had suffered from various ailments, often exacerbated by his refusal to rest and his preference for vigorous activity even when unwell. His health had been visibly deteriorating, a slow erosion of his once legendary strength. In the autumn of 1724, Peter's condition worsened considerably. He began to experience severe urinary problems and intense abdominal pain, symptoms indicative of a serious bladder or kidney infection. Despite his suffering, he continued to attend to state affairs, demonstrating his characteristic resilience and dedication. He even undertook an inspection of the Ladoga Canal, enduring cold and damp conditions that further aggravated his illness. During one particularly harsh incident, Peter, ever the practical man of action, plunged into icy waters to assist in the rescue of some stranded sailors, a heroic act that, while emblematic of his character, undoubtedly hastened the final decline of his health. The intense cold and physical exertion proved to be a critical turning point. By January 1725, it became clear that the emperor was gravely ill. He was confined to his bed in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, his body racked with pain and fever. Doctors, both Russian and foreign, attended him, but their efforts were in vain. The medical knowledge of the era was insufficient to combat the advanced stage of his affliction. In his final days, Peter attempted to dictate a will, intending to name his successor as per his own decree. However, his strength failed him, and he was able to write only a few illegible words before his hand grew too weak. The last discernible phrase was, "Leave all to," leaving the ultimate question of succession tragically unanswered in his final moments. On the morning of January 28, 1725, at the age of 52, Peter the Great breathed his last. His passing marked the end of an era, then a reign that had fundamentally reshaped the course of Russian history. The man who had dragged Russia into the modern age, who had built a new capital from the swamps, and who had forged an empire, was gone. His death left a profound void and an uncertain future for the vast nation he had so tirelessly transformed. The silence that fell over the Winter Palace that day was not merely the silence of a man's passing, but the quiet conclusion of a monumental, epoch-making life. The final moments of Peter the Great were clouded by an unfinished task of immense consequence, the naming of his successor. Conscious of his dwindling time, and having enacted the controversial 1722 Decree on Succession, which granted the reigning monarch the right to choose their heir, Peter had intended to exercise this very power on his deathbed. This decree, born from his tumultuous relationship with his son Alexis and his desire to prevent any return to old Muscovite ways, had fundamentally altered the traditional hereditary line of succession. As his life ebbed away, Peter made a desperate attempt to put his wishes into writing. With immense effort he called for paper and pen. His hand, however, was already too weak, trembling beyond control. He managed to scrawl a few characters, barely legible, before collapsing back onto his pillows. The phrase, or what was interpreted as such, began with "leave all to," but the crucial name that would complete the sentence, the identity of the individual upon whom the future of Russia would rest, remained unwritten. His last breath was drawn before he could clarify his final intent. Then this poignant failure to explicitly name an heir plunged Russia into a period of acute political uncertainty and instability. The 1722 decree, designed to ensure a worthy successor, paradoxically became the source of immediate contention. Without a clear directive from the deceased emperor, various factions within the court saw an opportunity to advance their own candidates. The old boyar families, the newly elevated service nobility, and the guards regiments all held competing interests and allegiances. The vacuum left by Peter's silence was profound. The powerful figures surrounding the throne, including Prince Alexander Menshikov, a close confidant of Peter, and members of the old aristocracy, quickly moved to secure their influence. The question of who would inherit the vast empire, the product of Peter's relentless toil, became a matter of intense negotiation and strategic manoeuvring in the hours immediately following his death. The Empress Catherine, Peter's wife, found herself at the centre of this sudden power struggle. While she had Peter's trust and affection, her humble origins and lack of a direct claim by traditional hereditary right made her position precarious without Peter's explicit endorsement. The unsigned will, therefore, did not merely leave a name blank. It opened the door to a complex dynastic struggle, marking the immediate aftermath of Peter's reign with a palpable sense of political tension and an uncertain future for the great empire he had so painstakingly forged. The immediate consequence of Peter the Great's unsigned will was a turbulent era in Russian history, aptly termed the Age of Palace Revolutions. For the next several decades, the imperial throne became a contested prize, frequently changing hands through a succession of coups and counter-coups, rather than through established hereditary lines. Peter's decree of 1722, intended to safeguard the succession and ensure a worthy ruler, paradoxically unleashed a period of profound instability, as the absence of a designated heir left the door open for ambitious factions to manipulate the succession. Upon Peter's death, his wife, Catherine I, was swiftly proclaimed empress. This move was orchestrated by powerful figures such as Prince Alexander Menshikov and the Imperial Guard, who saw their own influence tied to her ascension. Catherine's reign, however, was brief, lasting only 2 years. Her passing again sparked intense jockeying for power, leading to the enthronement of Peter II, and Peter the Great's grandson, a mere boy. Peter II's short reign was marked by the ascendancy of the old aristocratic families, who sought to undo some of Peter the Great's reforms and restore their traditional privileges. But his untimely death, also without an heir, reignited the succession crisis. The Supreme Privy Council, a powerful advisory body, then offered the throne to Anna Ivanovna, Peter the Great's niece, with stringent conditions designed to limit her autocratic power. Her acceptance, followed by her eventual repudiation of these conditions, demonstrated the ongoing struggle between the monarchy and the powerful noble factions. Anna's reign, too, was followed by further unrest. Her infant great-nephew, Ivan VI, was briefly proclaimed emperor, only to be overthrown by Elizabeth Petrovna, Peter the Great's daughter. In yet another palace coup, heavily supported by the Guards regiments, Elizabeth, who reigned for 2 decades, brought a measure of stability, but the underlying tension regarding succession remained. This cycle of weak rulers, often manipulated by powerful court favourites, and the recurring use of the Imperial Guard to effect changes in leadership, became the defining characteristic of this era. Each change in ruler was not merely a shift in personality, but often represented a triumph of one powerful court faction over another. The grand vision of Peter the Great, of a strong, unified Russia guided by a divinely chosen, competent monarch, was frequently overshadowed by the internal machinations and the shifting allegiances within the imperial court. The very structure of imperial power that Peter had meticulously built without the strong hand of a clear successor, proved vulnerable to these repeated internal tremors. In the immediate hours following Peter the Great's passing, the profound uncertainty surrounding the imperial succession was swiftly, if somewhat irregularly, resolved. The decree Peter had issued in 1722, granting the monarch the right to name their own successor, had failed to produce a written testament. Yet the spirit of that decree, which elevated merit and personal choice above traditional birthright, arguably paved the way for the ascension of Catherine I. Catherine, born Martha Helena Skoronska, a woman of humble Baltic origins, had risen through the ranks purely through Peter's favour and her undeniable personal qualities. Her marriage to Peter had been a testament to his disregard for conventional aristocratic expectations and his appreciation for her calming presence and practical intellect. Now, in the absence of a designated male heir, and with Peter's will unwritten, powerful figures at court, most notably Prince Alexander Menshikov, a close confidant and ally of Peter, moved decisively. They rallied the Imperial Guard, the elite regiments that had been a cornerstone of Peter's power, to support Catherine's claim. Through this orchestrated display of military and political force, Catherine I was proclaimed Empress of all Russia. Her reign, beginning in 1725, was notably brief, lasting just over 2 years. During this time she largely continued the policies of her late husband, albeit with less personal involvement in the intricate details of governance. The day-to-day administration often fell to the Supreme Privy Council, a newly formed body composed of Peter's most trusted advisers, including Menshikov. This council effectively governed in her name, reflecting Catherine's own preference for a more ceremonial role and her reliance on these experienced statesmen. Catherine's tenure on the throne underscored the immediate impact of Peter's personal choices on the fabric of the Russian state. Her elevation, an unlikely outcome in any other European monarchy of the time, was a direct consequence of Peter's radical defiance of tradition. However, her brief reign also highlighted the fragility of the new succession system Peter had attempted to establish. While she was his chosen consort and companion, her rule did not settle the fundamental question of how future successions would be managed, especially without a clear named heir from the preceding monarch. Her death in 1727, without having designated a successor herself, inevitably reopened the gates to further instability and the ongoing contest for the Russian throne. Despite the immediate tremors of succession and the subsequent period of court intrigue that would define the Age of Palace revolutions, the fundamental structure of the Russian state, as reshaped by Peter the Great, remained remarkably robust. The throne might have been contested and power shifted between various factions and regents, but the underlying imperial framework endured. Russia, no longer a landlocked principality, was irrevocably an empire, a status secured and codified during Peter's reign. This enduring empire possessed a military apparatus forged in the crucible of the Great Northern War. Peter's creation of a standing army and navy, organised and disciplined along European lines, represented a permanent transformation. These forces, despite their internal political leanings during periods of succession crisis, remained formidable instruments of state power. They projected Russian influence across its vast territories and, crucially, onto the European stage. The Baltic Sea, once a Swedish lake, now saw Russian warships patrolling its waters, and the new capital of St. Petersburg served as a tangible symbol of this newfound maritime and military might. Furthermore, Peter's relentless drive to reorient Russia towards Europe had fundamentally altered the nation's outlook. Although there were periods of internal reaction and debates over the extent of westernization, the die had been cast. European administrative practices, educational models, scientific advancements, and even cultural trends had been introduced, and, to varying degrees, integrated into Russian society, particularly among the elite. This European orientation, initially imposed with great force, had become an intrinsic part of Russia's identity as a great power. The very notion of Russia as an empire, a term officially adopted by Peter, carried with it the ambition and the means to participate in the complex dance of European diplomacy and warfare. The internal struggles for the crown, while disruptive, did not dismantle the powerful bureaucratic machinery, the extensive network of governors, nor the state-controlled economy that Peter had meticulously constructed. These institutions, however imperfect, provided a bedrock of stability upon which successive rulers would build, continuing to assert Russia's new place as a major player in the grand theatre of global affairs, a testament to the profound and lasting impact of Peter's singular vision. Peter the Great's reign, though marked by immense personal effort and considerable human cost, irrevocably altered the course of Russian history. Before him, Russia was largely isolated, its culture and governance shaped by Byzantine traditions and its vast, often inaccessible geography. After Peter, Russia was undeniably a European power, its trajectory set on a path of continuous engagement with the West. This transformation was not merely superficial, it penetrated deep into the fabric of the state and society. He dismantled ancient institutions and replaced them with structures that mirrored contemporary European monarchies. The Boyar Duma, a traditional advisory council, gave way to the Senate. The patriarchal leadership of the Orthodox Church was subsumed under state control through the Holy Synod. These changes consolidated imperial power, creating a more centralized and efficient, if often autocratic, system of governance. The introduction of the table of ranks, which based status on service rather than birth, fundamentally reshaped the nobility, creating a new service elite loyal to the crown and incentivized by merit. The shift towards Europeanization was equally profound. Peter's reforms touched every aspect of public life, from the military and administration to education, science, and even social customs. He established schools, academies, and technical institutions, recognizing that a modern state required an educated populace and skilled professionals. He encouraged the study of European languages, sciences, and arts, and sent young Russians abroad to learn from the more advanced nations of the West. The construction of St. Petersburg, a city built on European architectural principles and facing westward, served as a powerful, enduring symbol of this new orientation. Even the calendar was changed, aligning Russia with the Julian calendar used in much of Europe at the time. While not always universally embraced, these reforms gradually chipped away at Russia's traditional isolation, opening channels for intellectual exchange, technological transfer, and diplomatic interaction that would profoundly shape its future development. The foundations laid by Peter, though sometimes shaken by subsequent events, provided the enduring framework for Russia's continued rise as a major force on the world stage, forever linking its destiny with that of Europe. The legacy of Peter the Great presents a profound historical paradox. He was undeniably a visionary, a sovereign who dragged a vast, traditional empire into the modern age, forever altering its geopolitical standing and internal structure. His reforms laid the groundwork for Russia's subsequent imperial grandeur and its enduring engagement with European thought and technology. Yet the methods by which he achieved these transformative changes were often brutal, autocratic, and deeply tyrannical, leaving a complex and often contradictory imprint on the Russian psyche. Peter's passion for modernization was matched only by his ruthless determination. He tolerated no opposition to his sweeping agenda, whether from the old nobility, the conservative clergy, or even members of his own family. The construction of St. Petersburg, a monumental achievement, was built upon the suffering and deaths of countless serfs and labourers. His drive to create a powerful military and navy necessitated conscription and heavy taxation, imposing immense burdens on the peasantry. Those who resisted his decrees, whether minor or significant, faced severe punishment, including torture and execution, often personally overseen by the Tsar himself. This duality is central to understanding his impact. He was a reformer who believed in absolute power as the sole means to achieve progress. He forced change upon a reluctant nation, convinced that the ends justified the most coercive means. This approach fostered rapid development in certain sectors, but also entrenched a tradition of state authoritarianism and a disregard for individual liberties that would echo through centuries of Russian history. His reign demonstrates how profound societal change can be driven by a single, powerful will, yet also reveals the immense human cost when such will is unconstrained by checks or balances. The Great in his title is often debated, reflecting this very paradox. Was he great for what he built, or was his greatness diminished by the suffering he inflicted? Historians and commentators continue to grapple with this question, acknowledging the undeniable leaps forward Russia made under his rule, while simultaneously recognizing the profound human toll and the enduring reinforcement of an autocratic tradition. His reign stands as a powerful testament to the often uncomfortable truth that progress, in certain historical contexts, has been inextricably linked with oppression. Among Peter the Great's many ambitious undertakings, the creation of St. Petersburg stands as his most tangible and enduring monument. This city, rising from the marshlands of the Neva Delta, was more than just a new capital. It was a physical manifestation of Peter's radical vision for Russia. It embodied his relentless drive to integrate Russia into Europe, to forge a modern state, and to project imperial power onto the global stage. From its very inception, St. Petersburg was conceived as a window to the West. Unlike Moscow, with its ancient Kremlin and traditional Russian architecture, the new city was meticulously planned along European lines. Italian and French architects were invited to design its grand palaces, wide avenues, and intricate canal systems, transforming a desolate swamp into a vibrant metropolis. Peter himself actively participated in its design and construction, often working alongside the labourers, demonstrating his personal commitment to this monumental project. The city's strategic location, at the mouth of the Neva River on the Baltic Sea, was no accident. It provided Russia with its long-sought access to warm water ports, facilitating trade, naval power, and diplomatic exchange with the maritime nations of Western Europe. St. Petersburg became the headquarters of the new Russian Navy, a symbol of the country's newfound maritime strength. Its very existence declared Russia's arrival as a major European player, a power that could no longer be ignored. Yet the construction of this magnificent city came at an immense human cost. Thousands of serfs and conscripted labourers toiled in harsh conditions, battling the unforgiving climate, disease and starvation. The land was marshy and difficult to build upon, requiring extensive drainage and earthworks. The sheer scale of the undertaking, coupled with Peter's relentless demands, meant that many perished in the service of his vision. St. Petersburg, therefore, is not only a testament to Peter's genius and ambition, but also a stark reminder of the autocratic methods employed to achieve his goals. It remains a city of breathtaking beauty and profound historical significance, a physical embodiment of Peter the Great's transformative yet often brutal legacy. Central to Peter the Great's vision for a modern Russia was the establishment of a formidable military and a powerful navy. These forces were not merely instruments of war, they were the very cornerstones upon which Russian power would be built and maintained for centuries to come. Before Peter, Russia's military was largely a collection of feudal levies and unreliable Streltsy regiments, ill-equipped to contend with the professional armies of Western Europe. Peter recognized this fundamental weakness early in his reign and dedicated himself to a radical transformation. He began by discarding old traditions, is instigating a system of universal conscription that drew men from all social classes. This created a standing army, trained and disciplined according to the most advanced European methods. Foreign officers were recruited to drill troops, introduce new tactics, and teach the use of modern firearms and artillery. Uniforms were standardized, and a regular system of pay and provisions was established, fostering a sense of professionalism and loyalty. The Preobrazhensky and Semyonovsky Guards, Peter's own play regiments from his youth, became the elite vanguard of this new military, setting the standard for the entire army. Even more revolutionary was the creation of a Russian navy from scratch. Russia, a vast landlocked empire for much of its history, had no significant naval tradition. Peter, with his personal fascination for shipbuilding and seafaring, personally oversaw the construction of dockyards, the training of sailors, and the acquisition of the latest naval technology. He understood that control of the Baltic Sea was essential for Russia's security and its integration into European trade networks. The victories against Sweden in the Great Northern War, particularly at Ganget and Grengam, demonstrated the effectiveness of this nascent fleet, securing Russia's access to the Baltic and transforming it into a formidable maritime power. These military and naval reforms extended beyond mere equipment and tactics. They instilled a new martial culture within Russia. The table of ranks, for example, linked military service directly to social advancement, ensuring that merit, rather than birth, determined one's position within the armed forces. This created a professional officer corps loyal to the state. The formidable army and navy forged by Peter the Great would indeed serve as the bedrock of Russian imperial expansion and defence for generations, projecting Russian power across vast territories and securing its place as a dominant force on the European continent. Beyond the grand institutions of state and military, Peter the Great initiated a profound cultural and social transformation that reached into the very fabric of Russian daily life. His reforms were not merely administrative, they sought to remake Russian society, drawing it forcibly into the orbit of European customs and thought. This endeavour began with the most visible markers of identity, dress and appearance. Peter famously issued decrees mandating the shaving of beards, a deeply traditional symbol of Russian Orthodox piety and masculinity. Those who wished to retain their beards were subjected to a special tax, a clear signal of the emperor's determination to break with past customs. Similarly, traditional long-sleeved Russian garments were replaced with Western European attire, coats, breeches and stockings for men, and more fitted gowns for women. These changes, enforced with an almost uncompromising zeal, were intended to visually align the Russian elite with their European counterparts and to foster a more modern, secular outlook. Education, previously the domain of the Church, was fundamentally reformed and expanded. Peter established specialized schools for navigation, artillery, engineering and medicine, recognizing the practical knowledge required for a modern state. He sent young Russians abroad to study in European universities and workshops, bringing back not only skills but also new ideas and perspectives. The founding of the Russian Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, though completed after his death, was a testament to his commitment to fostering intellectual and scientific advancement within Russia. The role of the nobility was also significantly redefined. No longer could their status be solely inherited. Service to the state, whether in the military or civil administration, became the primary determinant of their standing. The table of ranks, introduced in 1722, created a merit-based hierarchy that allowed individuals from humbler origins to achieve noble status through dedicated service. This system, while reinforcing autocratic power, also injected a new dynamism into the traditionally rigid social structure. Peter also introduced European social customs such as the assembly, where men and women of the nobility were expected to gather for conversation, dancing, and card games. These events, often awkward and initially resisted, were designed to encourage social interaction and the adoption of Western etiquette. Through these sweeping cultural changes, Peter sought to forge a new Russian identity, one that was enlightened, disciplined, and outwardly oriented, laying the groundwork for a society fundamentally different from the one he inherited. As the long shadows of history settle, Peter the Great emerges as a figure of colossal significance, his impact reverberating through centuries. His reign was a crucible, fundamentally reshaping the trajectory of Russia and leaving an indelible mark on the broader canvas of world history. He was not merely a ruler, but a radical architect who, with an unyielding will, dismantled old structures and erected new ones, often with a profound disregard for tradition or human cost. His vision was singular: to lift Russia from its perceived backwardness and position it as a formidable European power. Through the creation of a modern army and navy, he forged a military machine capable of challenging the established powers of the continent, forever altering the geopolitical balance. The founding of St. Petersburg, a city born of marsh and ambition, stands as a tangible testament to his desire to project imperial strength and to physically anchor Russia to the west. Yet, Peter's legacy extends beyond military might and urban planning. He initiated a sweeping cultural revolution, compelling his people, especially the elite, to adopt Western customs, education, and administrative practices. This forceful modernization, while often brutal in its implementation, undeniably propelled Russia into a new era of intellectual and scientific engagement with Europe. He professionalized the state apparatus, reformed the church, and laid the foundations for institutions that would govern Russia for generations. In the grand sweep of historical figures, Peter the Great stands as one of the most transformative. He was a force of nature, driven by an insatiable curiosity and an unwavering determination to realize his vision for Russia. His methods were autocratic, his temperament often harsh, but the scale of his achievements is undeniable. He found a vast, isolated kingdom and left behind an empire, a major player on the European stage, irrevocably changed by his hand. His reign remains a pivotal moment, a testament to the power of individual will to reshape nations and redefine their destiny. Even as the centuries drift by, the spirit of Peter the Great continues to cast a long and intricate shadow over Russia. His colossal efforts to reshape a nation linger, embedded within the very fabric of its identity, its institutions, and its ongoing self-perception. The choices he made, the forceful trajectory he set, still resonate in the quiet debates about Russia's unique path and its enduring relationship with the wider world. The tension he introduced, between an inherent Russian distinctiveness and an aspiration towards European integration, remains a central theme in the nation's historical consciousness. Was Russia to be a bridge between East and West, or did Peter's reforms fundamentally alter its soul, pushing it irrevocably towards a Western model? These questions, born from his reign, continue to fuel intellectual discourse and political strategy. His legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of progress and oppression. The modern state he forged, with its powerful military and centralized bureaucracy, provided the framework for future imperial expansion and internal stability. Yet, the autocratic means he employed, the disregard for individual liberty, and the immense human cost of his grand projects also established a precedent for authoritarian rule that would echo through subsequent eras. The city of St. Petersburg, his grandest creation, stands as a perpetual monument to this enduring duality. It is a city of European elegance and enlightenment, yet it was built on the backs of countless labourers, a testament to both vision and ruthlessness. It embodies the paradox of Peter's reign, a radical embrace of modernity, achieved through methods that were anything but modern in their humanistic outlook. Thus, Peter the Great is not merely a figure of the past, confined to dusty history books. He is a living presence in the ongoing dialogue about Russia's place in the world, its internal struggles, and its evolving identity. His echoes are heard in every discussion about reform, national purpose, and the delicate balance between tradition and progress, proving that some legacies are simply too vast to ever truly fade away. And so, the vast tapestry of Peter the Great's life gently folds, its vibrant threads of ambition, conflict, and transformation settling into the quiet stillness of the past. We have journeyed through his restless youth, witnessed the forging of an empire, and observed the profound, often tumultuous, reshaping of a nation. The echoes of his grand designs, his relentless energy, and his singular vision now soften, receding into the calm expanse of history. Allow these narratives to drift, like leaves upon a placid stream, carrying with them the weight of centuries and the subtle hum of human endeavour. The monumental shifts he orchestrated, the enduring monuments he left behind, and the complex legacy that continues to define a nation now reside in the quiet chambers of memory. There is a gentle authority in these historical currents, a steady rhythm that invites contemplation and repose. The sun has set on the era of Peter Alexeyevich, but the stories of his reign continue to whisper through time, each one a testament to the enduring power of human will and the intricate dance of progress and consequence. There is no need for haste now, only the soft embrace of contemplation as these distant events recede. Let the final impressions of his remarkable life, a life that propelled Russia onto the world stage, settle within your mind. The sounds of shipyards, the clang of new coinage, the solemn decrees, and the bustling energy of a new capital all fade into a peaceful silence. The grand sweep of history, with its intricate details and profound implications, finds its quiet resting place. As the narrative draws to its close, may the weight of these historical accounts become a soothing presence. The journey through Peter's life, from his uncertain beginnings to his impactful end, has offered a glimpse into a world long past, yet one that still shapes our present. Now, as the final chapter closes, let the silence of time envelop these stories, inviting a gentle calm and perhaps a peaceful slumber. The world of Peter the Great, now a part of the quietude, awaits the dawn.